Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this course, we're going to take you through a lot of the features of Visual Studio Online and show how you can get connected and start using those features right away. We'll also make sure that you get to see some of the flash and sexiness around those particular features as we go into them. So to begin with, let's start with introductions. My name is Stephen Borg, and I'm the co-founder and strategist at Northwest Cadence. I've been an ALM MVP since 2005 when they launched the MVP program for this. It used to be team system back then. But my passion here is really to take what they have done with Team Foundation Server and have moved so much of that into Azure and into the cloud, and then added a ton of stuff on top of it. And that's what I'm very, very excited to get to talk about today. Again, I'm Stephen Borg.
And I'm James Tupper. I'm an ALM consultant at Northwest Cadence, and I've been an ALM MVP just a little bit less longer than Steve has. I've been one since 2014, just a few months ago.
And well, congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm here because I just love all the things you can do with developing software and all the different things that can help you develop software, right? And I think Azure and Visual Studio Online has some great features that can help an individual, a team, an enterprise, anyone.
Let's take a look at kind of what we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of different topics, areas. Let's take a look at what some of those things are. So first of all, a lap around VSO. And this is a quick run through VSO. Now, we'll try to make it quick, but man, there's so much goodness there that I can't promise anything.
It's hard to see everything.
It's very hard. Top tips for account managers, I think, is one that you'll take the lead on, and that's got some...
Yeah, it's got user management, how to administer the account, some things like that. There's not a whole lot, but there's a few things that you'll need to know when you first create your account.
And although account management may not be sexy, it sure is important, and there are some cool features there.
Absolutely.
Organizing and tracking work with VSO, we're going to grab a special guest for that one to come in and talk about organize and tracking work with Visual Studio Online. And I'm not going to tell you who that is until we get to that spot. Managing source code with Git.
So there's managing source code with Git. There's two different types of source code repositories you can use in in Visual Studio Online, Git and TFVC. We're going to start off with Git, and then we're going to move to Team Foundation version control and just kind of see what you can do with both of those as part of Visual Studio Online.
Yeah, I think that's really a powerful thing. A lot of misconceptions are out there that say, well, Visual Studio Online, that's just TFS, and it doesn't support some of the other things I want. And it supports both Git and Team Foundation version control. Yeah, true, as does Team Foundation Server does today.
Yeah.
But it's a really tough choice. You got to choose between those. It kind of depends on what you're used to and your development. We'll talk those pros and cons. I'm excited to talk about automating builds with Visual Studio Online. And in this section, we're going to walk through how to use the hosted build controller so you don't even have to configure or set up or install or maintain your own build service. You can just use Microsoft's hosted build service account.
It's really nifty.
Cloud load testing. I hear rumor that we're going to have another person come in, another special guest, to join us on cloud load testing with VSO. Once again, we're going to keep that private till we get there, but that's going to be an exciting demonstration.
The next thing we're seeing is Application Insights 101. And this is a great feature as part of Visual Studio Online, and it's actually getting pulled into Azure itself. Lots of cool different things in there to give you a really good insight as to what your application is doing and what the servers, the infrastructure that your applications are hosted on. What's kind of going on constantly. Live updates, all that sort of stuff. And the last thing we get to see is Visual Studio Online and Microsoft Azure. These are two really great things that just, once they're connected, there's a lot of benefits both ways, including MSDN benefits that you get in Azure, all the great services that Visual Studio Online has itself, and just kind of the tie back and forth. It's a really great ecosystem, and really powerful if you use all the different features that they offer.
Now, there's some prerequisites for this course. We got to be honest with you. There's some things you need to do. And if we look at those prerequisites, you're going to find you got to be new to Visual Studio Online.
Yeah. This is for someone that's never seen it, never heard of it, never really touched it at all.
Yeah. Now, if you have, there's stuff that you're going to get out of it, especially diving into App Insights or some of those other things. But you don't have to have any prerequisite knowledge about different products. You can start right from where you're at. If you have some development experience, that's definitely beneficial. We're going to show a little bit of code, not too much. If you've ever worked with work tracking or source code control, that'll probably help a little, but you don't need to have deep experience in all of those. What you do need to have are three things: a little bit of excitement, a little bit of energy, and also an internet connection. Now, since you're watching this, I'm guessing it's on the internet, and you already have that.
Yep.
All right. Lastly, before we move further, this is part of the Microsoft Virtual Academy. It's free online learning tailored to IT pros and developers. There's more than 1 million registered users. In fact, as I was walking up downstairs, there's now more than 1.8 million registered users. That's substantial number of users. Yeah. And it's online training that you can take to kind of build up your experience on Microsoft technologies, but also on non-Microsoft technologies, potentially. There's courses on things like Kanban and delivering with lean software development principles. There's things on Git. There's all sorts of different things that you can learn, especially lots of things on Microsoft Azure. So, let's get started. My name's Stephen Borg.
And I'm James Tupper.
And we're going to run through Visual Studio Online. Buckle your seatbelts, and we're off.
Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this session, we're going to be talking about a lap around Visual Studio Online. I'm James Tupper.
And I'm Stephen Borg.
So let's talk about the overview of what we're going to be doing in this session. We're going to be talking about what is Visual Studio Online, and then we're going to be doing an overview demo of it, a lap around Visual Studio Online, right? So, what is Visual Studio Online? It originates from the product Team Foundation Server. Now, Team Foundation Server is basically a place where you host source control, you do agile planning, you have work items to track work, you have team rooms so that people can talk to one another, test case management, and that includes running the test cases and tracing them back all the way from code into requirements, and so on and so forth. You get feedback management, continuous build, and continuous integration, right? You have all these great things in Team Foundation Server. Now, Visual Studio Online is essentially the hosted version of that, as well as a bountiful set of services that complement it, right? So there's the build service, there's the load testing service, application insights, continuous deployment to Azure. So you can kind of think of Visual Studio Online as TFS, as well as a bunch of these other hosted services that complement it, that add to it, that gives them more features and gives you more functionality in order to develop software. So let's go ahead and jump in. Do you want to show me?
I'm ready and willing. I'm very excited. Let's jump into a lap around Visual Studio Online. If we pop over to my screen, I am at a particular version. And I'll show you how to set this up maybe a little bit later. But here I am at a URL, nwc.visualstudio.com. And you can see this is my homepage. Basically, we start right here. I have many team projects. These are repositories with source control and work items and things of that nature here. I have team rooms. This is a place where people can get together and chat amongst themselves and really solve some difficult issues and have that tracked and searchable at a later point in time. I've got some links to things like load testing and integration with other services. I can get into getting started with application insights. There's, of course, some news here as well. And I want to point everybody to this attention, Start Account Trial. When you sign up, if you click that, it'll set your timer for go for 90 days when you get all the full features end to end of this whole thing. Couple other things I want to point out. We're going to talk about them later, but build. I've used 15 out of my free 60 minutes of hosted build service, and I haven't yet used any of my load testing minutes. And that's a way that I can use Microsoft's infrastructure to load test my websites. So let's get started. And to do so, I want to jump in to Nirvana. Now this is one particular team project, and you get an idea of what it's like to work on a project. So you can think of this as a project or a product that I'm working in. And the first thing I see is kind of this colorful thing here with things like documentation or critical bugs or stale work items. These items here happen to be links to work item queries. They show me things. It's some status. It looks like, James, we've deferred 6 particular features for later. And I'm not sure why. We could drill into that and figure out why. We'll do so in the future. If I look here, I see what are the changes that have recently occurred inside of various source code repositories that I have. Now, if I particularly pinned these, and I can go into any of them and I can unpin them as well. But I kind of want them here. And then I have my automated builds. Now you saw I've already burned 15 minutes of my allocated free 60 minutes, but you can see here I've been doing a lot of builds on things like the data collector, the web, the data pipeline. These are different builds that I've been running. It gives me neat information if I float over them, if it failed, how long it ran for, etc., those sorts of things. And I can see my members of this team as well and manage those members. So that's my home page. That's really basically where do I sit when I've got this Visual Studio Online. And I see this. Now, let's dive into some of those key elements. And we're going to be going into a lot more detail, but let's start on code. Why code? Frankly, you need a place to put your source code so that it is up away from the failure on your particular hard drive. You push these things up, either you go to a Team Foundation server that's running on premises, but this is a beautiful way to get that functionality out in the cloud where Microsoft is maintaining the infrastructure and they're doing all this for you. This is a safe place to put your code and get it pushed up in the cloud. So if I look at this, here's a particular hunk of code, this safe process template. And I can drill into this process template and see basically the code that was used and that's been uploaded, as well as all of its changes. You can see I can look at commits for it, branches, pull requests, etc. The idea behind this particular page, though, is it lets me open up and walk through what's happening, what is my code doing, what is it on the server, what's happening, as well as it being safe. So let me take one look. I'm going to change from the safe process template to the data pipeline service because I want to just pull open maybe a particular piece of code here, this JSON to blob worker or something like that, and you can pull it open and you can see that even though this happens to be Python, if you look, it's got it all nice and highlighted for me. Really very, very usable. And I can even do a comparison and see what are things that have changed. Now it looks like you've got a nice little comment here, and that's about the only thing that's changed. I'm looking at it now in line. We can go to side by side, etc. But the basic idea here is that in this code area, I've got a lot of very powerful functionality to track my code and to have a centralized place where people can send their changes. Let's go to work. This next little area here is where we talk about tracking the work we need to do. Now we're going to dive into this in a lot more detail later, but when we look at this work tab, we see a couple things. There are things that I need to do. Refactor SQL queries, upgrade to 64-bit Python 3 dot something, right? There are things that need to get done, as well as there are bugs. And I can take that bug, for instance, and drag it up and prioritize it however I want. I can move things around and set their priorities. I can also visualize my work on this board. And if I happen to be using Scrum or some other iterative technique, I can break things down into sprints very, very easily. Again, that's for a later look. This is just a quick overview. And why do you care about having your work in Visual Studio Online? Frankly, Visual Studio Online is a central point of truth where you can share knowledge among your entire team Or if you're an individual, you can keep track of those things that you might just forget over time. Now, as we'll see later, if I look down again at my little board, I see this nice flow, and I can also see if I'm working on too much stuff, I might be foreshadowing a bit much, but let's keep moving on. I also have a way that I can query for all these work items. Like if I go to my shared queries, and I'm going to open up those deferred work. What are we working on? Basically, this is some technical debt that we've accrued, and we've kind of deferred it for later, even though it's really important, right? Things like that Python error, or refactoring Python onto a worker role in Azure. These are things that we've deferred doing now, but we want to do later. But the idea is we're able to just very quickly see them and identify them. And they're just right here. Next, let's take a look at our build tab. And the build tab allows us to go out and see all of the builds that we have running. And we can see, for instance, the web build. We can look at that and see that in the last 14 days, what builds have occurred? And we can see, James, you triggered one that failed here.
Yeah, I do it from time to time.
Yep, we can open it up, and we can see why it failed. It looks like there was a PowerShell that didn't exist at that moment in time, so we can see why things failed. We can download those builds. We can assign some quality. This one is a rejected build, right? Terrible quality. So we can do these sorts of things. Again, why do I have this tab? The reason you have this tab, and the reason that Microsoft provides the automated build functionality is because you can take the work that you've been working on, the code you've been coding against, and you can create an automated build that wraps the information about those two things, compiles it, runs some tests, and lets you know if you might have some problems in your code. You're getting that really fast feedback cadence. And that's one of the things that I love about Visual Studio Online. It's the ability to get a very fast, interactive cadence going in the work items, in the source code, and in the builds as well. But let's not stop at builds. Yeah. Let's go look at tests. And if you jump over to test, you can see that we can create test plans and decompose them into test cases, and those test cases can have test steps that help us execute our tests. Now, in this particular test plan, what I'm doing is I've got a test plan called curl route scripts here, or a suite of tests called curl route scripts, and these are just ways that we're testing out some of the routes. And they're manual tests, and I can run these manual tests, and I can, if I run them right here, I can pass them, I can fail them, I can do all sorts of different things right from here. So when I run it, I can say, this test failed, this test passed, etc. So these are another way to get that fast feedback. And when I run a test from here and validate it, James, you can be sure that the code that I wrote has been tested to at least this level, that I have these tests. Now, I want to stress one thing before I leave. This is the web view of all this. And there's a lot of neat stuff here. But if you want to do true, powerful testing, including automated testing and other sorts of testing, it lights up with Visual Studio. So you can use Visual Studio with Visual Studio Online in much the same way that you use Visual Studio against Team Foundation Server. You know what? It's probably fair for me to mention, too, that if I'm on VSO, I am not tied to Visual Studio. I actually can go out and I can be using Xcode. I can be using something else. I mean, the demo we showed was Python, right? And frankly, I've fired up Notepad to do a couple edits in here. It all works with a vast number of different IDEs, integrated development environments. So if you were using, you can use VSO with Xcode, with Eclipse, with Visual Studio, a lot of different things, and not just for even Windows development. We can be developing on anything with Visual Studio Online. So that's a real fast overview. And I guess it wasn't actually that fast, but it was a pretty big overview.
There's lots and lots of different services that Visual Studio Online provides, right? The build service, the testing service, all that sort of stuff. Now, as a new user, how would I get started with this, right? I created an account, but what do I do?
That's a great question. So how do we just get started? How would you, if you want to get started with Visual Studio Online today, do that? Let's walk through that demo. And I'm going to minimize this and pull open a blank screen. About blank, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to browse to tfs.visualstudio.com. Now you can go directly to www.visualstudio.com, and there's a link there as well, but I kind of like this one because that link brings you right here as well. But you have to one more click, but you can see what is Visual Studio Online, what it does. You can see, create private cloud-hosted source code repositories, all sorts of information about it. I really like this view. And in addition, it's got this nice button here that says Get Started for free. No credit card required, nothing, easy, boom. So we have to sign in to our account. And I'm going to sign into a brand new one that's never been used before. That's demo.nwc@outlook.com. And I'm going to go ahead and sign in. Now, this is any live ID. This is the brilliance of this. If you have signed up to Hotmail, Outlook.com, whatever.
Xbox Live account.
Xbox Live. As long as you have a Visual Studio or a Microsoft ID, you can create a Visual Studio account. And now I'm creating what would be my Visual Studio account ID. So I'm going to give my full name in here, and I might call this my full name being demo account, I don't know, something like that. And then I have to come up with my account URL. This is probably the hardest part, right? Because you want something snazzy and easy to remember. So I'll use demo NWC account, terrible account name, and create the account. When I create that account, it's spinning up that URL, spinning up all the infrastructure for me, and giving me, boom, my own account. I can now start inviting people to it. I can create my first project from here, but that's it.
That was so fast.
That's how easy it is, yes.
Really, really quick to just get your own account right away.
Yep.
30 seconds.
Absolutely. And if you happen to have blown that you did a misspelling on your account, you can always change that at a later time. Mm-hmm. So.
Cool.
Excellent. That's it. That's how easy it is, James.
It's really, really easy.
So go out, fire it up. If you don't have a live ID or a Microsoft ID, you can set one up on Outlook.com or kind of anywhere. Set up one. Go to tfs.visualstudio.com. Click the Get Started for Free button, and you're in. That's all it takes. Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. And in this session, we're going to be talking about top tips for Visual Studio Online administrators. And that would be you if you just created a Visual Studio Online account. So let's get started. We're going to be covering a couple things, noticeably top tips and administering VSO. That's a nice big long demo, so pretty straightforward. On some of those top tips, we want to make sure that we set the right account owner and it's the right person. So we'll talk about managing administrators a little bit. We'll go ahead and add some new administrators. You win the lottery, something like that. You want someone else to take over for you. If it's your pet project, maybe you want to, you can keep it to yourself. But if you're working as a team, get somebody else on there as well. Adding those types of backup administrators, for instance. We're also going to be talking about creating a team project. We're going to create them from scratch. We'll see all this in the demonstration. We got to pick two things. Actually three. We got to name it. But then we've got to pick our version control, either Git or Team Foundation version control. A lot more on that later. We also pick a process template. That's going to be Scrum, CMMI, or an Agile template. And we're not going to dive into that. There's plenty of information on the web, but all of those support very common process methodologies you might use. And if you use a continuous delivery one like Kanban, that's supported in all of them, actually. We're going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to mention it only here. We won't see it in a demo, but you can migrate from your on-premises TFS to Visual Studio Online by using something called the Ops Hub VSO Migration Utility. And it's a tool that if you haven't made any edits to your local TFS repository, you can upload all that stuff, history and everything, up to VSO and get it up there. Now, you've just created a VSO account, so we're not going to be demonstrating that. We're going to instead go through administering a new project. You then need to do things like managing access for your team. And there's a couple key areas that I want to mention. If you have an MSDN subscription, you can sign up for as many, be a member of as many VSO team projects as you want. I'm personally a member of a ton of them with many dozens. A little too much work in process there of team projects. You also get 5 free basic users. Now, basic users can still do a lot, and the details are there on the web page that you can see, but basic users can work with version control and do some other things. Additionally, you can have an unlimited number of stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder might be someone like my boss, Lori, back at Northwest Cadence. Yeah. She wants to be able to jump in, see all of the work items, see what's happening, but she doesn't work with code at all. Not just on not a day-to-day process, she just doesn't work with code. And a stakeholder license is perfect for her. And there's unlimited numbers of those. They don't cost anything, so they're the perfect complement for your team. And you can also purchase additional plans via Microsoft Azure. All those details are out online. We're going to be talking mostly about administering it in this piece. Now, one more thing. And we're going to dive into detail on 2 of them, on these 2 things, but you also get free benefits. 15,000 virtual user minutes of cloud load testing and 60 minutes of automated hosting build. That's the current benefit. That's a lot of testing, right? You could send 200 users to hit your website for a pretty long time, or you could attack it with 15,000 users for 1 minute. But that's the idea. It gives you that ability to, well, I'm going to take away the ability and say it eliminates your excuse not to be doing load testing. We can also link it up to your Azure subscription, and we can go with that as well. So you can link this to an Azure subscription as well. So let's take a look at a demo of some of these key areas around managing a VSO account. And to do that, I'm going to turn it over to James to walk through that demo. James?
Perfect. So if we jump to my computer here, we have just the landing page. And when you create a team project, this is essentially what it's going to look like. Now, as an administrator, kind of the first thing you want to do is kind of start adding users and manage your users. How do I manage your users? Steve mentioned that there's multiple types of licenses. There's certain restrictions to some of those licenses, but not all of them. So how do we manage that? How do we see it? How do we choose, right? So right on the landing page, you can see I'm at nwc.visualcadence or visualstudio.com. And there is a little link here called Users. So if we click that link, it brings us to the user management page. This is where we get to add people and assign licenses to those people. So you'll notice there's a bunch of people on our team already added to this account. And it's really great because you can see exactly what license they have. And you'll notice there's the basic license, which Steve talked about. It's working with source code. There's not a lot of extra stuff in it. You'll see there's some VS Ultimate with MSDN, VS Premium with MSDN. And remember, any MSDN subscription, you can have an unlimited amount of people in your account, as well as if you have the subscription personally, you can be in as many projects as you want.
I like this one. There's an eligible MSDN subscriber right there.
Mm-hmm. So what that means is when you add someone and you associate it to a particular license, in this case, you get to choose eligible MSDN subscriber, it doesn't actually go out and reach out to see what license they have until they sign in. Right, so you can see Cheryl has been added to this account. She's just never signed in yet to have her account be checked against the MSDN subscription. Right, so how do you add someone? Right, so we have an account and we want to add it. You click this button up here, the Add button with a big green plus sign next to it. Kind of makes sense, and you can go ahead and just add someone. So I'm going to add demo.nwc@outlook.com. And we can add them just like that. Really easy. And now we get to choose their license. And note here, there's only 3 options. You get basic, stakeholder, and eligible MSDN subscriber. If they have an MSDN subscription, just choose eligible MSDN subscriber. it'll figure it out when they sign on, and it'll give them the correct license, which I think is pretty sweet.
That is.
And then you also get to choose whether they have, or you can choose if they are a basic or a stakeholder license. And then once you're done, you send an invitation, they get an awesome email with a link to the project, and it lets them sign up.
That's pretty cool. So that's kind of the user piece. Is there more to administering this than just users? What else do we have that we can administer?
No, the next thing that we can administer is account administration. So if we go back to our home page here and click this little gear button up in the top right, it brings us to the administration page. And on that, there is a settings tab that we can click. And in here, we have things such as what time zone do we want the server to be on? The default's going to be UTC. We have an account owner. So Steve owns this account, so he's the account owner. This is where you would change the account owner or the time zone. Now the other things here is account URL. So if you messed up that URL when you were signing up, this is where you go to change it, right? Or you can delete the account here as well, right? Totally up to you.
Ooh, account trial. I'm going to encourage all of you out there to click that button, start your free account, or a free account trial if you haven't done so. That lights everything up for you for 90 days.
Yep, that gives you full functionality for 90 days, no matter what your license is. Cool.
So this is fantastic, and this is a great way that you've shown us how to do some basic administration, but we've just signed up.
Yep.
I've just signed up with a brand new account. You saw me sign up with the account. What do I do next, or what do you do next? What is the person watching?
Yeah.
How do they take the very next step?
So if you just signed up for an account, you're going to get a page that looks just like this, right? If you jump to my computer, this is exactly what you're going to see.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw.
Exactly what you see when you sign up, right? You'll have create your first team project and a bunch of other different tiles around that will help you kind of figure Visual Studio Online out and kind of walk you through all the different features and functionality within it. So let's create our first team project here. And like Steve said, we get 3 options here. Minimum we have to put 3 things in. We can also put a description in, but that's kind of up to you. So let's just call this my first project. Real easy. My first project. We can give it a description, but I think the project name kind of describes it pretty well. Now, the next option we get is version control. We get to choose either Team Foundation version control or Git. Team Foundation version control being centralized, Git being decentralized. And we'll jump into that a bit later, but I'm just going to leave the default for now. And then our last choice here is process template. So we have Scrum, Agile, and CMMI. But we also get access to Kanban with any one of those. So it doesn't really matter which one you choose specifically. You'll get all the features and functionality as well. And once you're done, you just go ahead and click Create Project. And it goes back and creates a team project for you.
Pretty amazing. It's setting up a lot of stuff. Your work item repository, your version control repository, and a lot of other items right here when you click this button.
Mm-hmm. And there you go. Your new project, my first project, is ready. Are you ready to write some code? There's a lot of different things that it just helps you out with, right? So a lot of these notifications kind of show you what to do next, essentially, right?
Sure.
So that's next step. You've created your account. The first thing you need to do is create a team project. And the team project will allow you to start coding, start using the work area, the build area, the test area, all that sort of stuff. Now, I've created it and I've got myself in here, but how do I add someone else? How do I get Steve to come and use this team project, right? So I can just go into the members here and click Manage, click Add, and I can add a user. So I just go in, add a user, and I put in Steve's user account. And that's it. Go ahead and hit check name, save changes, and there he is. And just like that, he's been added to my team project, and now he can connect to this team project and be a collaborator on it. He can contribute code, he can help track the work, set up automated builds, do testing, that sort of stuff.
Additionally, I just got an email invite telling me that, hey, you've been invited to join this, with a link right into this demo NWC account. Mm-hmm. Excellent. One last thing, If you got hit by a bus, we'd be losing all this. How do we assign that co-administrator? Could you show us that one last thing?
Oh, yes.
How do you make a co-administrator?
Yeah, so let's say Steve's also a co-administrator of the project, right? I want him to, if I got hit by a bus, he would need to do some stuff. He would need to take over administrative privileges for that team. So if we jump back to my computer here, if I just click this little gear button up here again, brings us to the administration page, and we can go to security here. And if we click security, there is a project administrators group that we select that, go to the members, click add again. We can add a user. And again, I just put in Steve's name. And you can see it actually picked his name up there because he's now been added to this account. The account recognizes his name. I just add him like that and hit save changes. And now he's a project administrator on that account as well as myself. So he can do all the project administrative stuff. He can manage users. He can set up all this sort of stuff just like I can.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that demo because it kind of walks you through what you need to do at the administration level. So he set up a brand new account, created it, then you went in and you added some users to that project that you're working on, and he added me as a co-administrator on that team project so that I could help out on that team project. And then earlier you saw how if he needed to add me as a co-account administrator, he could do that same thing, just one level up. Love that demo. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks, Steve.
Now for you guys out there, I want you to reach out, grab a keyboard, log back into your account, create that very first team project, and add a couple users, add some friends of yours, and be on your way. We'll see you soon. Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this session, we're going to be talking about organizing and tracking work with Visual Studio Online. My name's Stephen Borg, and I'm joined by Aaron Bjork, a Principal Program Manager here at Microsoft. Aaron?
Thanks, Steve. As you mentioned, I'm a Program Manager here at the company, and I work on the Visual Studio Online projects and the Team Foundation Server product. And specifically in that space, I'm responsible for work item tracking, reporting, and all of our Agile project management tools. So this particular topic is near and dear to my heart.
So we've got the expert. We've got the right person to talk about this topic. Tell me a little bit about why I would track work inside of Visual Studio Online.
Yeah, so think about work item tracking in Visual Studio Online is the place where you keep all of the list of requirements, maybe defects, and feedback items that you're getting about your particular software project. We know that you're going to keep your code in Visual Studio Online, but where are you going to keep the list of everything you want either you or your team to do? And we're going to store that as work items inside Visual Studio Online, and we're going to manage them with a backlog and a set of boards that we're going to show you here in a bit.
So if I'm in Visual Studio Online, is this for a team of people? Is it an enterprise? Is it just me? Who can use Visual Studio Online?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I like to think about it is that it's really for all of us. Whether you're working as an individual on a software project, maybe you're a university student working with classmates on a project, or you're working in an enterprise on a larger software project, Visual Studio Online is for you. And we've got tools here that will allow you to manage work for all of those particular projects. For myself, I work on very large software projects. And here at the company, at Microsoft, we actually use Visual Studio Online to manage all of our work. But I'm a hobby developer on the side. I have some my own personal projects, and I track all of those in Visual Studio Online as well.
Excellent. I got to see it, though. Can you have a demo that you can show us?
Yeah, let's go take a look.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'm going to shift over here, and we're going to look at organizing your work. And the first project that I'm going to show you is appropriately named the Nirvana project. You can see here that we're looking at a dashboard of all of my work for the project. So this includes some queries here that are showing us different types of work. We've got builds at the bottom. I'm going to jump directly into our backlog and take a look at the requirements for this particular Nirvana project. Now, when I jump into that backlog, you'll notice I've got a lot of data here. I'm able to see a long list of that data. And the first thing I want to show you is that it's very easy to take the different items on this backlog and rearrange them. So maybe refactor SQL queries is the most important thing for my team to be doing, or maybe it's not important at all. And I can just grab these items and move them up and down on the backlog and reprioritize them as needed. Now, each of the items on these backlog are more than just an ID and a title. Let me jump into one of them and show you. I'm going to double click on this particular item called Add Report Path and Name to URL to improve the UX. You'll notice here that we can see the state that this particular work item is in. We can see a great description down here at the bottom that even supports inline images for showing pretty pictures of all the things that we want to build. And then we've got a nice field over here called acceptance criteria, which is where we're going to keep track of really what we call our definition of done for this particular work item. So when the URL links directly to the appropriate report page, we know we're done with this particular item. Now let me close that out. And while we can have a nice flat list here, which we call our backlog, I'm going to jump us up a level to a view that we call features. And features is a place where you can track a higher level of granularity for all those items on your backlog. And we can actually from there drill down into more fidelity. So at the top here, I've got an item called Scaled Agile Framework Reports. And this is a set of reports we're working on to support the Scaled Agile Framework. And right below that, you can see all the items that roll up to that. And we have 2 backlog items here, the one we just looked at before. We've got another one down here below that, and then we've actually got a bug or a defect that was found, and we're going to go ahead and get that fixed. So that's a very quick sort of view of the backlog features inside Visual Studio Online. Let me jump now over to what we call the queries area, where you can build your own set of queries to track all your work. And when I jump over to there, the first thing we're going to see is all the work assigned to us. So you can see I've got quite a bit here. I must be busy. I'm going to jump into one of my shared queries, and I've created a definition for a query called stale work items. And this is just a set of items, whether or not they're on my backlog or not, that haven't been touched in a certain number of days. I've got this one configured to actually be 60 days. And so any item that hasn't been touched in the last 60 days shows up in this list. And I can take this item and I can pin it to my home page for visibility. I can look through all the details here and get them updated. But one of the things that I like to do with these kind of queries is I like to create a work item chart, which allows me to really visualize what's going on here. So for this particular item, I'm going to jump over here, and you can see I've created a chart called Stale Work Items Chart, appropriately named, and it's got a nice little pie chart which shows me a visualization of that. Now, it's super easy to create these. I could take a look at what state all these items are in. I could look at that state over time if I wanted to see it trended. And I could even take and adjust the colors to make sure that they make sense for my project or my team. So with this chart, I've now created it. And I'm going to take it and go ahead and pin it to my project homepage. And when I jump back over, you'll see that that chart now shows up down here at the bottom. And I can easily rearrange it and put it in the place that I want, so I can really pay attention to these stale work items and hopefully drive this down to 0. Looks like we've got 14 of them right now, and we need to get that down to a healthier number.
That's a nice view. So basically, what I'm seeing is I can go into Visual Studio Online and very easily understand the status of my project, what I need to do next, and even some troubleshooting queries that point out where I might be falling over a little bit.
Yeah, that's the real beauty of these tools, is that whether this is a nice simple backlog for your particular project, whether it's a list of to-dos that you need to get done or a list of defects, we've got tools that support all of that and allow you to really compose the necessary charts, queries, and views that make sense for your project.
So I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I love this online view. It looks great. But I often work offline, and my tool of choice is Excel.
Yeah, so great question. One of the beauty of this particular project is that we've integrated it with tools that people love. And one of the tools that people love is Microsoft Excel. We find it all the time. People use it for all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to show you how you can take one of those items, let's say stale work items, and not only can you look at it here in the product, but you can also look at it in Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to jump down here to the bottom and pull up Excel. And we've got an add-in that we ship with the product, and it adds a nice little tab here into Excel called Team. going to create a new list from here. And I've already bound this directly to my project. And I can go ahead and pick the list of items that are there. So let me go in and configure this. Let's configure the server connection and grab our Nirvana project. And let's go ahead and create that new list. And you'll see here that it's pointing to a query. I could select any query that I want, but I'm going to pick the stale work items query. And when I do that, it just brings all that data directly into Excel. Now, it's not just in Excel, it's actually living in Excel. So one of the great things about this is I could change the name of Improved Data Collector to, I could update this to say, to make the product better. And let's just take that item and let's publish it back to Visual Studio Online. So when I click Publish, if you were watching down here at the bottom, you noticed it happened very, very fast. But we actually pushed this data back. I'm going to switch back over to Visual Studio Online and refresh this query. And you'll notice that Improved Data Collector actually updated and fell off my list. Now, Steve, why did it fall off my list?
It's not 60 days old any longer.
It's not 60 days old. So you can see here live editing, and it happens through Excel. And you can take Excel offline and work in offline mode as well if you want to batch up changes and then push them all back to the project when you're ready.
That's powerful. That kind of covers how I could very easily use this product to kind of understand where I'm at, individual, a team, even an enterprise. Now, how do I get started? What's the call to action for the people out here? What do they do next to get started using Visual Studio Online?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me show you how you might get started, assuming you've created yourself an account, and what that might look like for you inside the product. So let's switch back over. I've got a new tab opened here. And I've created a project about 10 minutes ago, appropriately named My First Project. You can see that our homepage here isn't quite as interesting. Got some work to do to make it look that way. So I'm going to jump directly into the backlog here. And using our product backlog tools here, I'm going to add some items for my project. So we might build a login page. We might need a shopping cart of some sort for this particular project. Maybe some administration, and then maybe some reporting. Just make up a few items. Now again, what's great is I can reorder these things as needed. So maybe we're going to start with login page at the top. It probably makes sense. We could open it up and detail what the login page looks like, attach a spec, and be ready to go. Or we could just get started. And one of the ways that I like to get started is I like to use what's known as a Kanban board or a visualization of this backlog. So this view is nice, but this view is where it really comes alive. And let me show you how this works. So this is a view of that exact same backlog that we showed earlier, but now we've got it laid out across a set of columns that represent the various states for each of these particular items. Now, these states are the default ones that we give you: new, approved, committed, and done. That might make sense for your project. But they also might not. And what we allow you to do is come up and add new states. Maybe we have new, ready. Maybe we have one called spect. And then maybe a new one called in progress. And we can map them to different states. We can adjust limits on each of these, and I'll show you how that works. And I can really compose a board that makes sense for me. Again, I'm glad that the product defaults something for me, but I really want it to be personalized and make sense for me. Now what's great is I can take these items and I can move them through this flow very, very naturally. Just dragging and dropping them, move them through. And what I can do is take a board like this, I can put it in full screen mode and put it maybe in my house on a monitor, in the hallway where my team project is, or maybe in my dorm room, and make sure that I can actually see all the work that I'm working on for a particular project.
That's nice, because that gives me an idea of whether I have too much stuff in progress or not, if I can just kind of look at this and visually see it. How do I move these things? Can I touch them? You mentioned hanging them up on a board.
Yes.
How far can I go?
Yes, so I was using my mouse there, and of course, it seems like everybody's got touch monitors here as well. So it's probably hard to see me doing this, but I'm using my finger now, and I'm able to move these items across the board and just drag and drop them into different states. So it's really, really easy to do. And one of the things I want to point out is as I was doing that, you might have noticed that some things were changing colors as I moved them around and dragged them and dropped them. This little number that we got configured up here at the top is called a work in process limit. And that's just a simple visual cue, which is going to allow us to make sure that we don't create log jams or roadblocks in the flow of all this work. So if I've got everything spec'd, that means nothing's in progress. Or if I've got too many things in progress, I'm probably not getting any of those done. And so we give you some nice little tools there to adorn the board with those visual cues to make sure that you can keep your flow very, very healthy for your project and for your team.
That's beautiful. Aaron, thank you very much for that demo. That kind of walked us right through the whole process and kind of gave me an understanding of what I can use it for, both for an individual, my own projects, or across my entire team. So thank you very much. Appreciate you showing us how we can organize and track work in Visual Studio Online.
My pleasure, Steve. Yep.
Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. And in this session, we're going to be talking about managing source code with Git in Visual Studio Online. My name's Stephen Borg.
And I'm James Tupper.
Let's get started. We're going to cover two main areas: choosing whether or not you should use Team Foundation version control or Git, and a demo on using Git. And that demo is going to be a nice one. It's just some really neat stuff with Visual Studio Online and Git.
Really, really cool.
First, you got to pick what you're going to use. So, in determining whether or not you should use Team Foundation version control or Git, which are two different version control paradigms, both available to you in Visual Studio Online, you need to know a few things. First, Git is a distributed version control. A very easy branching and merging. The branching and merging occurs locally, extraordinarily lightweight, integrates seamlessly with things like Visual Studio, as well as lots of cross-platform IDEs. So if you happen to be using something like Xcode, for instance, or an IDE that, any IDE that supports Git, you can use Visual Studio Online with Git. If you flip it and you look at Team Foundation version control, you get a different set of benefits. It's a single source of truth. You have a centralized location where all that version control is held. It's scalable to very, very large repositories. Repositories with gigabytes and gigabytes of data with hundreds of thousands of files very, very easily. And it integrates seamlessly with Visual Studio and Eclipse-based IDEs. So that's kind of the call you have to make, Git or TFVC. Now in this session, we're going to be talking predominantly about Git. Git is one of the world's most popular version control systems, and it's well liked by a lot of people. In fact, James and I both, in a previous MVA course, spent 8 hours teaching you how to use Git. So you can go check out that course if you want a more extensive how-to with the Git version control system. So James, what say you to a demo? Should we jump in and start a demonstration?
Yeah, let's go for it. And let's start with a project that already has Git code in it, some history, some code in it, using some of the features of Visual Studio Online itself.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So here we are in a team project on Visual Studio Online. It's the Nirvana team project. It has a few Git repositories, but we're going to be focusing on one of them. If we go ahead and hit one of the area path up here that just says code, that brings us to the Git repositories via the web access. And you'll notice here that I'm connected to a particular Git repository called Data Pipeline Service.
So that's maybe a distinction worth calling out. We can have multiple Git repositories in one team project with Git.
Absolutely.
And with Visual Studio Team Foundation version control, we have then one main location, but we can have multiple different folders underneath that. Okay.
Yep. Which is great because that means you can track your work all together in one place while working on multiple different projects.
Okay.
Right?
Good.
Cool. So here's my Git repository, and you'll notice it's called Data Pipeline Service at the top. That's how you know which Git repository you're connected to. And then on the right-hand side, we have which branch I'm connected to in the Git repository. If we drop those down, we see other Git repositories here, or the other branches that are a part of this Git repository. We're currently connected to the master branch. And what we see here is the Git repository on the left-hand side, the folder structure, as well as all of the files that are part of the Git repository. So I can come in here, dig into the code while in the web access, right? So I can actually connect to a Git repository in the web and dig through the code itself.
Let's see one of them.
Cool. So if I actually jump into one of these, this is a Python repository actually. It syntax highlights the Python for me. So I can easily come in here and take a look at the code itself. What's in the repository, get great visuals of the actual Python code, and it supports a bunch of different languages.
Excellent.
Really, really cool. I can actually download the file here.
Now, but you don't check in or check out on the web, is that correct?
No, there's no way to actually interact with the Git repository via the web access.
Okay.
But you can still explore it and check out different things.
Sure.
Right? So this is the current version of the Git repository. These are the files that are currently there, the latest version of these files.
Sure.
Right? What you can also do is take a look at the entire history of version control itself. So if we jump from Explorer here to the commits page, that will show us all of the history on that Git repository itself. You'll see when the commit was, a quick summary of the actual commit, the commit message, right? Who changed it, all that sort of stuff. You get a quick hash. So you get to see full history of the commit itself. There's also an option to just choose my commits, and there's my commits.
Looks like you were the prime committer on this one.
Yeah.
What are those dots running along the side? What do those do?
Yeah, so these are actually different sizes, and it may be hard to see in the video, but these are all different sizes. They basically change the size depending on how large that change in that commit was, right? So if I hover above this one file affected. If I hover above another one that has a larger circle or larger dot, we get 2 files affected, and so on, right? So the larger the dot, the larger the commit actually was, whereas the smaller the dot, the smaller the commit was, right?
Makes sense.
Cool. So moving along, there's also a branches area as part of this code. What this shows us is when I'm connected to a Git repository, which is the data pipeline service, and one of its branches, which is the master branch, if I compare that branch to the other branches, how many commits behind is it, or how many commits ahead is it, right? So if we were looking from the master branch, how many commits behind is this Python 3 port branch? And you'll notice it's in this red, and it's 54 commits behind, and it's 1 commit ahead, right? Go down one more, we have Python rewrite, 87 commits behind, 4 commits ahead.
Excellent. So that kind of gives me an idea of where my branches are, and maybe some of them are too old and I just want to go delete those eventually.
Yep.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm. Or you can see, are we integrating often, right?
Yeah.
Do we have a branch over here that we're doing some sort of feature development on that we need to integrate more consistently or more often? How far behind is it?
Yeah.
Cool. Now this last feature is the pull request feature. Pull requests are a great way to merge code from a topic branch or a feature branch into your mainline code. It's essentially a code review. It's a great way to do a code review to bring new code, new feature code, new bug code or defect code into the master branch, into your actual code.
Yeah, from a kind of a Git workflow standpoint, the pull request it's pretty a standard way. So I'll take a branch, I'll do some changes in the branch, and then I'll go back to James and say, hey, here's a pull request for you, and it's got these changes in it. James can look at it and then say, yeah, I like that. Go ahead and merge that into master so we can start moving on from that point. Yeah.
So let's take a look at one that's actually completed. Right? So if I jump here and just hit this completed button, there's all my different completed pull requests, and I'm just going to click the top one here. And what that does is that brings us into, we'll see right at the top, we're merging a particular branch into master. And we get a discussion, right? We get the initial, what were the commit messages here? We get that the pull request can automatically be merged without any issues. We'll notice the next thing is interesting is we actually get a commit pushed. What this means is that there was a pull request that was created. There was a change that needed to happen on the branch. The change was pushed to that branch, and the pull request was automatically updated, and alert was sent on the pull request itself. Right, so we'll see that halfway through there was another commit. Again, it says that it can be merged automatically. And then you'll see you can actually highlight the code and comment the code, as Andrew did here, saying that this is confusing, right? Which I can totally understand, that my code sometimes does that.
So this is a very interesting thing, because what you have here is the ability to look at code, make comments on it, maybe go back and forth a little bit, and then merge that into the final branch, the master branch.
Yeah, or even if there needs to be an update, it will automatically get pushed to this pull request itself. You don't lose that context, which is great. Cool. So let's actually go into Visual Studio, make a change, push the change up, and see what happens on the web.
Sounds great. I want to stop you for a second, though.
Cool.
You're going to Visual Studio.
Yes.
Where else can I go? Is this the only place I can make these changes?
Not at all. This is just purely Git, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of clients that you can use with Git, right?
Yep.
So it's completely wide open, command line, Unix system, Linux systems, all that stuff.
Perfect.
Cool. So jump over to Visual Studio, and you'll see I'm connected to the same team project, connected to the same Git repository, and I already have my solution open. So I'm going to jump to the Solution Explorer, open up one of my files, and just make a quick comment. I'm just going to make a quick comment and say, here's my comment. Not the best code change in the world, but it'll do for this purpose. Once we're done, we can just go back to Team Explorer. And Team Explorer is really where you interact with Git via Visual Studio. It has a Git provider built into it. So we'll see here that all the different things you can do with the Git repository are changes, branches, unsynced commits. They're marked in the red over here on the left.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump into changes, and it should have picked up that change I made, that comment I made, right? So I've got to put in a commit message here saying add comment to JSON to blob worker. And just like that, I'm ready to commit. Once I'm done, I commit it.
Now that's now up on the server, right?
Not quite. So this commit, right, it's Git. So when we do a commit, it will commit it to our local repository. It's a distributed version control system.
And that, I think, is one of the main differences when you're making that decision between whether you should go with a TFVC or with a Git repo. Git allows you to do multiple commits locally before you do anything with the server at all. Whereas Team Foundation Server version control, or TFVC, that will ask you to, at every commit, go right to the server itself.
Cool.
Back to you. Sorry for that interruption.
No, you're totally fine. So the next thing we have to do is, because it's only locally and we can have multiple commits before we actually push it back to the server, is that we need to sync it, right? And so that's the terminology used in Visual Studio is called sync. So if we jump back to our Visual Studio, we'll see that after we committed it, it actually gives us a warning saying the commit was created locally, sync to share your changes with the server, which is kind of nice. So I'm just going to click that sync button, and it brings me to the unsynced commit page, and I just click sync right here. And what that does is actually does two things when I click that button. The first thing it does is it does a pull to get any new code that's on the server that I don't have yet, and then it pushes my code from my local Git repository to the server.
Good. Prove it.
Now, let's go back and take a look. If we go to the Explorer of my Git repository and open up that file I just changed, we should be able to see that change. And there it is. Here's comment. Perfect.
Now, one thing I want to note too is that when you do make these check-ins, we didn't do it, but you can associate those with work items as well, and those associations then are persisted. And we have those linkages that occur between your version control and your work items. And I think that's another important feature, not specifically Git related, but that linkage is supported by Visual Studio Online, and I love that VSO is able to do that.
Absolutely. You get the full traceability from commit to tracking your work and back and forth, right? It's fantastic.
So this is wonderful. I love this walkthrough that you've shown me and all the capabilities of Git, but as I'm watching these videos, I might be new to Visual Studio Online. I may have a Git repo already, but I might be brand new. How do I now take the next steps? What's their call to action? What can they do to move forward with Git in their brand new VSO account?
Perfect. Great question. So the first thing that we need to do when you first create a VSO account is that you need to create a Git team project, or a team project that uses Git as its version control system, right? So I have another tab open here on Internet Explorer, and it's just the main page where we can create new team projects. So there's a little button here called New underneath Recent Projects and Teams, and if I click that, it gives me some options. It gives me a form, and one of those options here is version control. And you'll notice that TFVC is the default option, but we can drop that down and choose Git instead. And I'm just going to call this Git project. Right? Real easy. You can also choose your process template here. I'm just going to keep the default as Scrum and click Create Project. Now what that does is that creates a team project using Git as the version control system. But remember that you can also have as many Git repositories in that team project itself.
I love that. Your team is absolutely going to love this.
Yes, absolutely. So once we're done, let's navigate to the project. Gives us a nice little link right there, brings us to the team project homepage. So if we already have a Git repository locally that we want to add to Visual Studio Online, just basically push it to Visual Studio Online, it actually walks us through that. So if we jump to the code area here, it created an empty Git repository for us. So there's a couple options here. There's clone an empty Git repository or push an existing one. So let's push an existing one. And the greatest part about this is that it actually gives you the commands to do it from the command line. So right here, down here, you'll notice that you can do it from Visual Studio, and it has some links on how to do that, or from the command line with what you need to run via the command line.
I think we should do it via the command line, because that proves that we can do it outside of Visual Studio as well. We can do it right from within a command line.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Okay.
So I've actually got a Git repository that I'm in right now on my PowerShell command line, and you'll notice that we're on the master branch, and we just say git status to show us that we are on the branch master. We have a clean working directory. So let's go ahead and bring those commands in, copy and paste them. Switch over, paste it in, and just hit enter.
Nice. Prove it. Type git remote for me.
Git remote.
Sure. Bingo. We've added Origin.
And now you'll notice that Origin has been added as a remote. Now the next thing we need to do is push our code from our local repository to VSO. So go ahead and grab the last command there, copy it, and paste it in, and again, just hit enter. And just like that, it compresses our objects, it pushes our changes right up to VSO. Now the great part about this is that because Git is just a distributed version control system, we have the entire history locally, so that when we push our local Git repository to VSO, it brings that history with it, and we don't lose any of that.
That actually is a really nice thing, because you can take an existing Git repository from any other provider, from a local Git repo, from anywhere basically, and you can take that repository and push it to Visual Studio Online with all of its history, and then you get the advantage of being able to start using things like work items, the automatic build, the continuous delivery to Azure. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you get with Visual Studio Online, and this just takes your existing Git repo and drops it right there.
Yep.
I'm gonna say prove it.
Totally.
I'm gonna say prove it.
That's totally fine. So if we go back to the browser and I just hit F5 or click the refresh button here, there's our code.
Brilliant.
That's everything.
It's right there. And click history for me just once.
If we see history,
And there you are.
there's all
very
of our
impressed.
code. All of
Very
our history
impressed.
right there.
Excellent. James, that was a fantastic demo. For those of you out there listening, if all you need to do to get onto Git,
Yeah.
crazy sound, all you need to do to adopt Git, create that team project and take your existing Git repo and push it right up to Visual Studio Online. And as a second, if you don't have version control right now, but you want to move to Git, you could take the other path, and the instructions were there.
Yep.
Simply clone an empty Git repository, paste in all of your existing code, and push it right back up to start using Git on Visual Studio Online. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks, Steve.
Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this session, we're going to be talking about using source code with Team Foundation version control. It's quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of words there. Basically, what we'll be covering is, like the other sessions, choosing a Team Foundation version control, or Git. We're going to have that, and then dive into a demo. And we'll be walking through using Team Foundation version control with that. Now, as you choose between TFVC or Git, that's Team Foundation version control, or Git, you have a couple choices to make. And well, let me start at the beginning. Visual Studio Online supports two completely different version control systems. You can choose a centralized version control system, like Team Foundation version control, or you can choose a distributed version control like Git. So we have one of those. You're either going to go with Team Foundation version control or you'll go with Git. So there's pros and cons to both of them. Team Foundation version control has been part of Team Foundation Server for ages. Been there since 2005, since the launch. Very mature. It integrates extraordinarily tightly with tools like Visual Studio and Eclipse, any Eclipse-based IDEs. It's a centralized version control, so it's one place where you have all of that single source of truth, and things get uploaded into that one single repository. That repository is then hosted on Visual Studio Online. Also, it is scalable to enormously large repositories. Many gigabytes of data with tens of thousands or millions of files can be supported in Team Foundation version control. Git, on the other hand, is a very popular distributed version control system. And for Git, you're looking for things like offline access and the ability to commit multiple times locally before we share our changes with the rest of the organization. Very easy branching and merging. And Git will work across the board on, I'd say, pretty much any IDE that's in common use today. Because it's such a common open source version control system, Xcode supports it, Eclipse supports it, Visual Studio supports it, and a whole slew of other IDEs, including very, very light ones that are just almost text editors. So you get a lot of support with that with Git. So you have to make that choice. Now, in this presentation, we're going to be focused on using Team Foundation version control. There's a lot of really wonderful things that we can do there. But the best way to see it is through a demo. And James, I'm going to kick it over to you on a demo on how we can work with Team Foundation version control.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now we're going to start with a project that already exists. It has some history in it. It's on Visual Studio Online, so we're just going to jump to the team project homepage, right? So here's our team project homepage, and all we have to do to get to the code is click the code area, which is pretty straightforward. And we jump over there, and we'll notice that it jumps right into our source code repository on the left-hand side. We have our project called My First Project. And then we have some other things, such as a branch. So this is our main branch, and it's denoted by this little branching glyph over here on the left-hand side. And we can see that there's a demo web app in there. The first thing here that we can see is that we can actually dive into the code from the web access itself. rather than having to grab the code, download the code, and take a look at it, we can just jump into the web access, point to our folder structure, and just jump into whatever file we want to look at. So let's take a look at one of those files. So if I jump into demo web app and go to the controllers, there's one of the controllers, account controller.cs. This is a C# folder, and you'll notice here that it has some syntax highlighting. Well, actually, it has syntax highlighting. So we have our using statements, some comments. If we scroll down, we'll see all the different things that are a part of this file itself, which is fantastic. Now, there's some other really cool features that are a part of just viewing this file too. One of them, which is a really cool one, called annotate. And there's a little button here that we can see that says show annotation blocks for this file. And if we click that, what it brings up on the left-hand side is, where did this change come from? Essentially, where did this line of code right here come into play for this particular file? And you'll notice when I highlight that piece of code, it actually highlights the left-hand side here. And the left-hand side here is denoting the change set number, which is 34 over here, who made that change set, which is James Tepper, that's me, and the date that it was changed. And we'll notice here that if I hover above it, it actually brings in the comment for that change set too. Now, if we come down here and look at these two lines, we'll notice that these two were part of a different change set. So in line, where did this piece of code, this line specifically come from? Whether it be a change set or something else.
That's really handy, and I can see using that as a debugging mechanism. If I come in and you've made a couple bad changes in one thing, I can look at this, find the change set, and find out maybe what other code went in that change set as well.
Yep.
Nice.
Cool. Now, there's some other things here too. One of them is compare. So we can actually compare files, different versions of a file in Team Foundation version control from the web. You don't need a tool or a client at all to do any sort of diffs between different file versions. So you'll notice here that this is just change set 34 versus change set 35, which is the latest as it says there on the web. And you'll notice that it does the diff side by side with a little cool scroll bar here on the left showing where on the page that change was made. And you'll see green denotes added code and red will denote removed code. Right?
Makes sense.
Yep, pretty easy. There's also a little button here that shows this is a side-by-side diff. If we click this, it will switch us to an inline diff. So if I go ahead and click that, it shows me, rather than having two different files side-by-side, just show me the file itself and show me the diff within the file without having two different sets of files.
That's very convenient. So I might use this if I happen to be just really quickly trying to understand some code. I can go out here, I can look at it, I can make a diff, I can really get a hold of it. I don't see this replacing Visual Studio or anything down at that level, but it makes it very, very convenient to have that right up here front and center as part of a feature of Visual Studio Online.
Yep, absolutely. Now let's go to one last thing. There's also this area called change sets. So if we jump to change sets here, you'll be able to see all of the changes in the entire project, right? And you'll notice that there's Source Explorer over here on the left-hand side. If I click that button, I can actually scope down to different contexts within my team project and get the history on that context, right? So I can click on main, and it'll show me all of the change sets for main. Or if I click on Build Process Templates, it will show me all of the change sets for Build Process Templates.
That's slick.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Cool. So let's actually jump into an IDE and make a code change and see what that kind of workflow would look like from a developer's perspective.
Sounds good.
So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio here, and you'll notice that I'm connected to my first project, which was the project I was just working in. And it brings up a little message, a little yellow message in Visual Studio, essentially telling me I need to have a local workspace. So if you remember, this is a centralized version control system, so all of the code and all of the history resides on the server. All we need to do is map the server path to our local path, and bring those files down locally. So to do that, it gives you a little help here that says configure workspace. Click that button. It automatically puts it into a folder structure, the default projects or workspaces folder in your user profile folder, but you can change that here. I'm just going to leave it as is and hit map and get. So that will map it and then do a get latest on my code.
pulling it down basically from the server to that local workspace. Now, I want to just share a little bit, if I could, with people who might be just getting started with Visual Studio Online. This is one of the more common areas that people trip up a little bit. It's on that mapping of the workspaces. It's very important that you just kind of realize centralized version control system, Visual Studio Online has all of that code and the changes, and you need to pull it down to a particular folder locally. That's your representation of what's there. And then you interact by saying, hey, has anyone made any changes on the server? And when you've made changes, you interact by pushing those changes up to the server itself by checking in your code.
Thanks, Steve.
My pleasure.
So now that we've got the workspace mapped and we've got the code locally, it'll actually open up and show us what solutions we have in those folders so we can just quickly open one up and make a change to it, right?
Sounds good.
So we have Team Explorer here, and here's our solution, and you'll see that it's in the main folder and it's in the demo web app folder. So if I just double click that, it opens it for me. And you'll see that it turns bold. That means the file or the solution has now been opened, and now we can start working on it, right? So before I even get into that, I'm going to jump to a little area called My Work, just to show you where does my work come from Visual Studio. And this is a great way to see that. If we click that, it'll show me what are the work items that are assigned to me and ready to kind of work on, right? So if we look here, there's available work items called 254 dev task, right? Pretty generic, but you could think of it as unit testing or adding some functionality, something like that. The greatest part about this is that we could just drag and drop this into in progress, right? Currently, this is a to-do task. Drag and drop right to in progress, and you'll notice that it kind of focuses our attention. It says, hey, this is what I'm going to start working on. Before I even do any coding, this is what I'm going to work on.
And I think this is really interesting because that dev task resides in VSO. This is not something that's just here in Visual Studio. This is a VSO project. This is a work item, and we're linking this together, that change set, with that work item.
Yep, absolutely.
Back to you.
Cool, so now let's jump to our code and actually make a change to it, right? So let's jump into controllers and open up one of the controller files. And I'm just gonna come in here and make another comment. This is the constructor. This is the account controller constructor. Just like that. Go ahead and save it. And if we pop back to Team Explorer, we'll notice what happens. It actually picks up that edit and it starts doing the association to that task right there, right as soon as we start coding. It's not an afterthought where we link up our changes to a work item after we're done with them. It's forward thinking. I'm focused on this particular dev task. I'm making changes for this particular dev task, right? And once we're done, there's a little button here that says check in. So we jump over there and we hit check in. We'll notice that that work item, the dev task, is in the related work items. We can make a comment. And you'll also notice one thing here is that is resolved. So the default behavior here is I work on a task, I make changes for that task, I go to check it in, and it resolves that task, right? Pretty easy workflow. So let's make a change saying add comment to the account controller file, like that, and hit check in. And you'll notice there's a dialog here. The first one is check in confirmation. Continue to check in one item and resolve/associate one work item, right? These can get annoying, so if you want to, you can hit don't prompt again and just hit yes. And there it goes. It checks in our file for us.
And then that is pushed now up to Visual Studio Online?
Yeah. So now our code's in Visual Studio Online, right? And if we go to Visual Studio Online, and jump over here, and we'll have to go back to the Explorer so that we can see stuff. Go to the history of our file, and we'll notice that my change set that I just checked in, add comment to account controller file, is there. And if I click that to get more information on it, it shows me again, I made the check-in, when I made the check-in, how many associated work items are there, and it actually shows the associated work item right there in my change set, as well as doing the diff, right? So you can see that here's the inline diff again of what was added or what was changed on which files as part of that change set.
That's pretty cool.
It's pretty sweet.
This is pretty amazing stuff. Now I want to come back then and challenge you. I'm a new user.
Yep.
I've just signed up for Visual Studio Online, and I'm understanding that, yeah, I need some place to put my code and to protect it that's off of my machine. Or maybe I have a team and we want to move to Visual Studio Online. Help me get there. What are the few steps I need to take as a new user to get some of my existing code up into Visual Studio Online so I can start work today?
Absolutely. So when we first create an account in Visual Studio Online, it will take us to this landing page. If I click this, it takes us to this landing page right here. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to create a new team project. And to do so, there's a link right here under Recent Projects and Teams. And if you click that, it will bring up a little dialog that allows you to walk through creating a new team project. So give it a project name, call it my TFVC project. Right? Give it a description if you want to, choose the process template, and then the last piece, which is the most important piece here, is choose which version control system that you want to use for this team project. Team Foundation version control is already selected, so I'm going to leave that as it is and click Create Project. And that will go and create a brand new team project that we can connect to via IDEs or the web access or other tools out there.
Gotta say, I love that spot. I know I've probably mentioned it before, but your project is created and your team is going to absolutely love this.
Absolutely love it.
I agree.
And it gives us a link to navigate to the project. So this will navigate us to the project via the web access, but that doesn't really help us. We haven't gotten code there yet. So how do we do that? Let's jump back to an IDE. We're going to jump back into Visual Studio here. I'm going to close out of my context. And you'll notice here in Team Explorer, right at the top, there's a little plugin. And if you hover above it, it says Connect to Team Project. So what we're going to want to do is click that button. It brings us to this Connect page. And what we're going to want to do is select Team Projects. It's the next link. Click Select Team Projects. And you'll notice that my TFVC project is now here. It's been created. It's now something I can connect to. So I'm going to select that, checkbox it, and then hit Connect. We're now connected to it, and if we go to the home page, we'll get the same dialog we saw earlier, where it says you need to configure your workspace because you haven't mapped a local directory to the server yet so that you can get code there. So let's go ahead and do that, and click Map and Get. And again, I'm just going to leave the defaults here as my TFVC project in the Workspaces folder and click Map and Get. We've now mapped everything. There wasn't anything in that folder, so we didn't get anything. But what we want to do is just go ahead and open up Source Control Explorer. And you'll notice here that our project is now mapped locally. So when I select my project on the left, you'll see that there's a local path to where it was mapped to. So how do we get code that we have pushed into our project? We just click this link, opens up Windows Explorer, and I have my other code on another Windows Explorer. And I'm just going to select all, copy, go back to this one, and paste it in. And just like that, it'll copy and paste it into the folder.
You got yourself a lot of code there.
Yeah, lots of files. Perfect. It's now in, and we can go back to our Team Explorer and hit the Pending Changes window. Now you'll notice something here is that there's no actual included changes, but there is a link that says there's a bunch of ads that were detected. So if we click that button and just hit Promote, it should have everything selected by default. Hit Promote. It will promote all of our code into included changes. And now all we have to do is go to the comment and say, adding initial code, and check it in. And that's all you have to do. And now all of your code is pushed into Visual Studio Online. It is now located in Visual Studio Online. You can share it with your team members, you can collaborate on it, and now you can version your code using Team Foundation version control.
Yeah, I've got to say, if you don't have your source code somewhere off your local machine, you've got a problem. You're wrong. You need to have that somewhere else. This is a brilliant way to take your code, get it up somewhere where you can work on it, and it's at least safe. And better yet, if you're working collaboratively with someone, if James and I are working together, or your whole team is working together, now you've got it uploaded, online, shared, where we can all work on it, even if we're geographically distributed. That's a really powerful thing. James, that was a wonderful demo.
Thanks.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I want to urge those folks out there that are watching, go out, grab a Visual Studio Online account, create that team project, very, very easy to do.
Very
as you'll
simple.
see, and get your code moved over and uploaded into Visual Studio Online. Thanks again, James.
Thanks, Steve. Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this session, we're going to be talking about automating builds in Visual Studio Online. I'm James Tupper, and I'm joined here with
Stephen Borg.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the overview, what we're going to be talking about today. So there's two things really kind of why automated builds? Why would we ever do an automated build? And then we're going to demo it. How do you use the hosted build controller? So the first point is, why would you ever do an automated build? So we see a lot in the industry, a lot of companies going towards faster cadences to deploying software, right? And really the reason behind going faster and getting incremental builds, that sort of stuff, building features incrementally, is to get feedback in a very fast and rapid fashion, right? Not just end user feedback, but feedback from stakeholders, feedback from tests, feedback from just compilation, right? The whole point of automating your builds is to get that feedback more often and get it faster back.
I've got to say, if it was, when I look at it, it's almost as if there's a magic wand, and if you can wave one magic wand, automated builds are that magic wand. They provide so much very fast feedback. I mean, even does your code compile? That kind of stuff is so useful from a developer standpoint. And secondly, you couple that thing with run some unit tests during it. By all means, find out if those are broken and deploy your code too. So it's almost a magic wand. You definitely want to be there with those automated builds for your deployments.
And that's just feedback, right? The next point is consistency. So a developer's machine can have all these custom dependencies, all these files that you may not find on a server, right? Or on an end user's machine. So having consistency in the environment in which you install, compile, or test the code is really, really important, so that let's say someone uses some sort of dependency locally that doesn't exist anywhere else, you'll find that immediately with an automated build. Now there's two other points, continuous integration and continuous deployment. Two big mindsets for building faster and deploying on faster cadences, which is really getting your code in one line, one branch, so that you can consistently always have a good code line, right? Always have a good branch to build off of. Continuous integration will force you to do that. Every time someone checks their code in, an automated build gets kicked off. You get that feedback immediately, right? And continuous deployment is take that a step further and now take your code after it's been built, unit tested, and push it to an actual environment, right? It's one thing to build, compile, and test your code, but it's another thing to deploy it somewhere and make sure it actually runs after it's been compiled, right? Lots of different reasons to build code, right? Testing, deployment, and just compilation in general. Now, with Visual Studio Online, you have the option. It's again a service. Visual Studio Online has a bunch of services, and automated builds is just one of them, right? So Visual Studio Online hosted build allows you to create or let you run builds in the cloud. It's an elastic build agent, essentially, so that you can spin up build agents, run your builds without ever having infrastructure locally to run the build itself. Now there's a few caveats to that. One, the build can't require custom installation of dependencies. So if your build has a custom dependency that you have to manually install on your machine, you can't do it in Visual Studio hosted build. That doesn't mean that you can't use NuGet packages to manage your dependencies, because NuGet packages, it supports automatic downloads of NuGet packages. You don't even have to check those into version control. Now, the second point, you can only have one build at a time. Unfortunately, that's just how it works with your account. If you have your own build servers, you can kick off multiple builds, you can expand your infrastructure, but if you use the hosted build system, you can only have one build at a time. Now, the next point is you only get 60 minutes for free on the hosted build service. So if you're going to be using it and you want to take advantage of those build minutes, you only get 60 of them, which means that your builds have to run really, really quickly. The next point, build process must use less than 75 gigabytes of storage. Most of the time, I think that's okay.
That's a pretty big limitation.
It's a very, very large limitation. It is there, though, right? It is there. And the final and last point is that the build process itself can't require administrative privileges on the machine. So if you have some sort of script or some sort of task or build activity that requires administrative privileges, you can't use the hosted build, unfortunately.
Yeah. True, and I think it's also times out after an hour or two. So you got to kind of make sure they're nice and tight, so that you don't have overly long builds that take hours and hours to run.
Yep.
Keep that limitation in.
Cool. With all that in mind, how about you show us a demo of the hosted build controller?
So let's pop into Internet Explorer and take a look at what we have in front of us today. So if we switch over, we're looking at this Nirvana project that we've been using. And there's 3 areas here that I'll highlight. The data collector, the web, and the data pipeline. These are builds that we have executed. These are kind of pinned to that front page so we can see how things have progressed. And if I keep a look at this, I can see that the web build was completed just 12 minutes ago, and we had a failure a while back and some other failures and some partially successful ones. In other words, they compiled successfully, but the tests failed somewhere in there. But so far it's been running along, chugging along pretty well. So I can see this. Let's click on it, and it's going to open up that particular build tab. And I'm at the build tab in the build explorer looking at my web builds. And right now I'm only looking at 2 of these. I might want to stretch this up and look back maybe the last 28 days, and I can see we've had a lot of builds. And some of these were triggered by yourself, some by me. And if we open up one of those builds, we can see a few things. Here we had a problem. It's just a warning that popped up. We can see that 1 test run was completed, 13 tests, all of them passed. Very clean. We can understand what's happened. Additionally, with builds, remember, we want to use them to get really fast feedback. We want to understand what's happening. And this gives us a view into all the things that are happening. And once I see this view, I might say, you know what, this was a good build. This is ready for initial test. And I can set some kind of build qualities here as well. And these build qualities can then be used to identify which of these we should promote between environments, for instance. Just another quick thing to know. We might also decide to retain this one indefinitely. It's a really cool build. It's maybe a release that went to production. We can click retain it indefinitely. And right from the web, we can download this build. We can pull down all the results, everything that's dropped it. We can take that drop, download it, and now we have a copy of that build. I think that's a really nice thing to have. There's a lot of other build definitions here. We have our data controller, and we can look at all of those builds as well. We can look at the data pipeline builds and see what's happened there. There's a lot of ways we can do that and see these things online. Now I'm going to go to data collector, and I can queue a new build right from here. So if I wanted to trigger a new build of the data collector, I could do it right from here. I specify my build controller. Now this particular one, I want to caution you, this is not a hosted build controller. And I want to point out, this is based off our Nirvana controller. And the reason is, this particular one requires some installations and some dependencies that I can't get directly from NuGet, unfortunately. So based on that, I have another controller which is also happens to be hosted in Azure, but wouldn't need to. And this is my first main point about build controllers, is that just when you're in VSO, you have a lot more power than you might think. We don't have to use the hosted build controller. I love the service. It's right there. It's easy. It's already configured for you. But if you have a very complicated build, you can create another controller and run it locally inside your network, or potentially you could be running it inside Azure. This one happens to be hosted in Azure. And so you've got a lot of power with Visual Studio Online. We're going to leave that as the Nirvana build controller, and I'm just going to prioritize that and queue that new build. And right from here, we can see these new builds kicking off, running through, and working. Now, James is going to kick off, if I go over here to the web, I'm going to ask James to check in some code against the web. Why? I like to see things that continuous integration being fired. So go ahead and check one in for me if you would.
Yeah, and I'm just going to preface this real quick that I'm checking it in with a related work item as well, and we're not queuing it. I'm not over here right-clicking on the build and queuing it. It's being triggered purely based off of my check-in.
Yeah, exactly. So James is just going to do a check-in. He's just going to commit to that web project. And I've got my queued build here, and periodically I'm just going to refresh this page. And there it is. So James checked in his build, and boom, it's continuous integration kicks off, and we are now starting to build this
Code.
application, this code. Yeah. Exactly. Thanks.
Yep.
So that's a quick walkthrough of this whole build and hosting your build, an automated build out in Azure, and being able to work with your builds both through the hosted build controller and not the hosted build controller.
Cool. So we have some builds that we've already got up there. They already have continuous integration triggers. How do I get started from scratch? Like, I just have an application. How do I start doing an automated build?
Very glad you asked. I'm going to go in and let's start from scratch. You might be coming in, having just brought your code and dropped it into Visual Studio Online. How do you create that first automated build? Now, depends if you're using TFVC or Git, but both of them walk through very similarly. So this time we're going to come back, but now I'm going to be inside of Visual Studio. So I'm going to start in Visual Studio, and I'm going to, from my Team Explorer, select builds. And inside the builds, you'll see I can see all of the builds that have occurred. Here's my favorite build definition, and notice we've got that continuous integration build that you just triggered for me. But I'm going to create a brand new build. So to do that, I simply click New Build Definition. Now, inside of the new build definition, we're going to give it a name. Now, we'll use this name. I have my solution open, the nwc.web solution. I'm just going to leave that open. I think that's fine. And this is the build definition name. I might add a CI on top of that. This is my continuous integration build. Not that all of our builds aren't set up for continuous integration, right? But I choose continuous integration here. There are some other options. Again, why continuous integration? Because you want this thing to build every single time you check in. So if it breaks, you know where it broke. Now we're going to go to our source settings. We're going to get our source from this particular branch, from this particular repository. And the repository we're going to pull it from is the web repository. And this is what we're going to grab. We're going to go to Build Defaults. And on this case, we're going to grab our hosted build controller. We're going to use the hosted build controller. We don't want to spin up our own. We don't want to use any of our own dependencies. It's a great place to start. Now, it can copy the build output to the server somewhere. It can copy it to a following path. Or we can say, you know, this build doesn't copy output files at all. And I'm going to keep this very, very simple. I'm going to go to the process. And in my solution to build, well, let's first look. I've got this default template. Let me swap that over to one of the later ones. I want to use the git template.12. It's a nice later build template. Let's use that one. And if I do that, you'll see it auto-populates a few of my things. This also happens if you're using the TFVC builds. They'll auto-populate a lot. But you can see we have our automated tests. They're already specified. It went in and looked through my solution and saw I had unit tests. So it just grabbed them. And we can do any of the other things that we can set up. There's a lot of different options that we can use. And I'm going to hand wave a little over the options. I think it's important that we just do the minimum to get started. And then we have a retention policy. How many of these do we want to keep? I'm going to use the default and save that build. This is my NWC CI build. You'll see it's right down here. And if I right-click that build, I can queue a new build definition. Even though it's a continuous integration build, I can manually queue it at any time as well. And I'm going to do so. Here it's on the hosted build controller. Everything's set up, and I click queue. Now you'll see it's queued right here. I'm going to double-click it. And you can see there's one request in the queue for this build controller, and the position in the queue is number 1.
Now, just to note something here is that position number 1 means position number 1 for the build queue of this particular VSO account, not for all of VSO and all of the builds in VSO. So one request, it seems like nothing's being used there, but that's just because we're the only ones on our account right now.
And that's really nice to know. It's nice to know that you're not having to queue up behind every other VSO user.
Yeah.
This is for your account, and it's spinning up a machine for you. So we can see it over here. We have our build in the queue. If I view the build details, we'll see a little bit more information. And it's building 226. It'll take a little while to start kicking off that build. It's only been running now for 0 seconds. And now we get some stuff that's coming through. Overall build process. It's running on the agent. It's a reserved build agent, the hosted build agent for us, and starting to run through that process. Now we can wait till this all finishes. It's usually a very fast build. It doesn't take too long, but I want to highlight a couple things. One is I've got 60 free minutes. So I can pop on, run these builds, and run quite a few of them for free simply because I have signed up for Visual Studio Online. It's something that I just get out of the box. And you'll notice this one's been running for about 37 seconds. We're going to be at a minute, a little over a minute. You basically have 50, 60 builds that you can do. And to be honest, this is a relatively complicated build. There's lots of NuGet packages that are being pulled down, lots of other things as well, although not a whole lot of tests. So in this case, what you've seen is creating a brand new build from scratch.
That was really fast and really, really easy. Thanks, Steve.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
It is.
It's some really good stuff. So I absolutely encourage you to reach out, grab that new build, and just take whatever you've built, right-click, create a new build, walk through that simple wizard, and get it out there on the hosted build engine so you can run a hosted build yourself. Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. Right now, we're going to be talking about cloud-based load testing. My name's Stephen Borg, and I'm joined by Charles Sterling, a senior program manager here at Microsoft. Charles, do you mind giving the audience a little bit of an introduction?
Not a problem. So as Steve said, my name is Charles Sterling. I've been with Microsoft for 25 years, and I think I have one of the best jobs at the entire company. I'm in charge of the feedback channels. And the developer division asked me to take a look at load testing a little while ago. And the reason they asked me to focus on that is most teams want to do load testing, but from our feedback is that most teams aren't doing load testing. And the reason is the friction and just getting started tends to actually take a little bit too long and take a little bit too much effort.
Well, I know from my own experience when I'm attempting to start a project, it doesn't get prioritized as high as I'd like it to be because it takes a little bit of time to get started. And frankly, I just want to fire something off, get a quick test out there so I can start baselining how my load is, how I'm performing, how my app's working out. But I agree, it has been difficult.
It's a great point. You also mentioned the fact that it gets at the end. It gets put all the way at the end. So you can't load test until you've got something to load test. So that being the case, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go out and show you some of the things that you can find out from load testing very easily, very quickly, why you want to do load testing, and then how to get started and how we made it much, much easier for you to get started.
This is the session for me because that's something I'm very interested in.
Okay.
Chuck, do you have a demo for that?
Absolutely. I'm in my Visual Studio Online account that I just created a little while ago, a couple of weeks ago actually at this point. And you'll see from my homepage, I've got a new load test hub and a new load testing tile. Now, I'm not going to go there yet because I promised to tell you why you'd want to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with the tile that says Application Insights. It's been around, I think, about 6 months at this point. So looking at my Application Insights, I've got my website that I've been working on for the last couple of weeks. And you can see I've got my dashboard that was created for me automatically. And it's saying that somebody is actually just accessing it. So somebody out there in TV land may have just hit my website, in which case, thank you very much. You're one of the 4 guys that have. And today we're looking at the performance. So looking at the Application Insights performance data, you'll see that I've got some huge spikes right here. And this is actually a spike from a load test that I just ran. because I had just checked in a new page and I wanted to know how it was going to be performing. So I just ran a load test against it. And you can see from this spike right off the bat, you don't have to dig in very deep, is that I've got this whole SQL Express master is actually my highest latency dependency. It is taking the longest time. Now from here, I could go ahead and take a look at my top 10 slowest issues by count and dig into this and actually drill right into the exact line of code. But this isn't an application insights session. I think you might be covering that later.
Yep.
But this is a load test session. So I want to show you, how did I get those spikes? What was involved with that? So I'm going to go back to my Visual Studio Online account. And like I said, I can either start with a tile or a brand new hub that we've got. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the hub.
I have to stop you for a second. That's really cool, because what you did is you were able to load up your website, your login, just that fast, and notice where that problem occurred. And you did that by generating a very fast, some load against that.
Absolutely. And
awesome.
And it only takes, it only asks for 2 questions, and one of them you don't even have to supply, which is a name. So here's that little web application I've been working on, my Parts Unlimited website. I'm going to go ahead and grab that URL, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And at this point, you probably want to call it something other than sample load test. Otherwise, you'll have lots of those, and you won't know what's in there. So we're going to go ahead and call it Parts Unlimited. And I didn't see those problems until I actually got over 50 users. So we're going to go ahead and set it to 200, and we'll run it for 4 minutes. And I could go ahead and set my think time. It turns out for that particular problem, that wasn't relevant. And in my application, I'm very embarrassed to say I'm not even differentiating for browsers. I'm not checking for even like mobile browsers and re-rendering. So this case, it wasn't all that important. But I'm going to show you how to do some more advanced scenarios as well. And that was it. I don't know. We should have done a time, because we have all these prompts, so we should have actually timed it. But it usually takes me about 25 seconds to create these.
So is this how you created the spike that showed you the problem originally?
Absolutely. So yeah, this actually, matter of fact, if we go back in real time into my application insights and go from 7 days to the last hour, you'll actually see in real time, actually you can see right there where it says raw event stream, you can actually see that these are coming in from my that load test that we're running, and we'll actually see another spike coming in right now. So let's see if we can actually drill down into it. It will be there. You're gonna have to trust me on this. It's gonna be here.
It might take a little bit of time to get up there and process.
Yeah, we can come back.
That was insanely fast. So I can see why you're very excited about being able to have Visual Studio Online users immediately be able to test their website.
Absolutely.
But that was pretty simple. You just hit the top thing. Is that all I get?
Well, the first thing that people want to do is, instead of actually just looking at their home page, they want to look at not just one URL, because I could have typed in anything, but multiple URLs. So it even actually says that right here in our description of the finished product. You should go to the full authoring experience in Visual Studio to actually be able to change those heuristics and more. The other things that people ask about is changing the user load pattern. Do I put them up all up front? Do I actually go out and change the way that I run different tests? Maybe right now I'm just looking at one URL, but I could go out and have adding a product and adding users. And which one am I going to load more often, more frequently? And lastly, I think we timed out with the Visual Studio Online, it was only 5 minutes. We don't want people to run up a whole bunch of minutes as their first run. But if I wanted to run it for 48 hours, say, that's
sure.
Something that's easy to accomplish from within the full authoring experience. And what you see here on the screen is a load test that is now finished. So this is the one I ran actually while we were chatting, and you did the introduction. So it just ran a couple minutes ago, and you'll see that my request per second is 890.82. That's actually well within my SLA that I wanted for my little application. So I'm actually doing pretty good. What that means is, using this tool, I've actually resolved the problem that I already had. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at how do we actually do these more advanced scenarios. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and start Visual Studio. I think it's in this one. And actually, you can see from within Visual Studio those runs that we did from Visual Studio Online. So if I want to do advanced reporting or regression testing, so I did a test today, and I want to compare it with last sprint. Are we gaining ground from sprint to sprint? That's pretty important stuff.
Yeah, very much.
I can see that in these archive views. So in this view that you see right now, this is entirely test runs that were made from VSO, but I've got runs up in here like Gary.load and my data bound. Those were all initiated from Visual Studio. So I see those regardless of how I initiated them. So I promised to walk you through the more advanced scenario. So let's go ahead and do File, Add New Project. And since I'm a big fan of Northwest Cadence, we're going to go ahead and call this one the Northwest Cadence load test.
And you're building a web performance and load test.
Yeah. This is something else that the discoverability of our load testing could be better. But it is a load test, and we start with a web performance test as your initiation point.
Okay.
Your entry point. Great.
So that's kind of how I specify these are the URLs I want to hit.
Exactly.
You define that first.
In the web test.
Okay.
And you'll see that our web test gives you a much better experience than typing in a bunch of URLs. It actually gives me a recorder. So hitting the record button, I can go ahead and go to my home page. And we'll say that I want to take a look at the About page. And you'll see right here on the left-hand side, it's actually giving me these URLs.
You've got some UI work to do.
Oh, yeah. My parts of limited application, yes. If anybody's ever seen my design work, this is actually almost the penultimate of what I can accomplish anyways. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and stop this. I could go out and do advanced scenarios like data binding and pass and certificates. So this is what's happening here is it's detecting those dynamic parameters. Let's go ahead and not even bother. We're not going to show that. Okay. But this is how I get multiple URLs. This is usually the first thing that people ask from looking at the Visual Studio Online experience. Now, the second thing people ask about is how do I go ahead and add a user load pattern that's different than initiate all of them up front? Or how do I get more than 200, I think is what the limit was. So what we're going to do is go over here to our load test. Let's get rid of these dialog boxes that are stuck on top. And Northwest Cadence, probably...
Highlighted?
Oh, there it is. Thank you. And we're going to go ahead and choose Add Load Test. And we're going to call this one, like I said, I'm a fan of James Whitaker and exploratory testing, so we're going to call this one the Happy Tour, looking at the highlights of the application. At this point, rather than actually loading it up, and I could set it up to 2,000 or 20,000 or whatever the case is here, we want to step it up incrementally. I think you guys recommend that as a best practice at Northwest Cadence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
More realistic.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and start it with one user, or a step duration, maybe 1 second, and a user count, or a step count. Every second passes, we're going to add 10 new users. 10 is great, and we want to hit that magic 2,000. I've seen issues with our database actually maxing out at around that 1,500 people, so we want to run 2,000 users in this case. At this point, it's going to ask me, how do I want to distribute those different web tests? I could have multiples of those recordings, and I want to know how I'm going to distribute those. I'm going to go ahead and leave it the default. At this point, you can see that I've got a couple of those web tests that I already created, and this is the one that we just recorded. So I definitely want to have that one. And maybe adding new products or adding new users. That's another good one. So basic traffic that you're going to see on your site on a regular basis is what we're going to look at. At this point, we want to take a look at mostly that recording, that happy tour. And
well, it makes sense. That's mostly the load. People are looking at things, not necessarily adding products and adding new users.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And this is a do as I say, not as I do. Don't ever leave your web test called web test 1. It should be called happy tour or whatever it was that you want, the scenario that you were looking at.
Sure. Fair enough.
Okay, at this point, I could go out and change the network type. We're going to want to shove as much through this pipe as we possibly can, so we're going to leave that at LAN. At this point, I could go ahead and specify the header of the browser type that's sent across. And perhaps a lot of my users are using Chrome. I could go out and say that there are a lot of Chrome users, or etc. And I could go out and start specifying hard code and then distribute the rest. And if this were going to be only an on-premise load test, meaning machines I have access to that I've created myself, I could probably go ahead and want to specify performance counters and capture those directly. I'm going to show you a better way of doing this. Since this is a production system, you probably aren't going to have access to the performance counters directly from your load test. So I'll show you a better way of doing that, Steve.
Good.
I also mentioned the fact that if I wanted to do a run duration of more than an hour, whatever the case is, I could do that here. So let's go ahead and run this as 45 minutes. Now at this point, our test is ready to run. Now I believe I set this up to either 2,000 or 20,000. I didn't count the numbers.
I think it was 2,000 users.
2,000 users. So in looking at the scenario here, I would probably want like 10 computers to run that. So I would go out and ask Shad at your company or James or some of the guys that you got to go out and boot up and install 10 computers. And this is one of the reasons why people aren't doing load testing, is because they don't want to go out and buy 10 computers. They don't want to install the operating system on 10 computers. So rather than actually having you do that on local agents, we've got this local.test settings file. I'm going to open that up. And there's an option here that we should actually work on the discoverability here that says I'm going to run this using Visual Studio Online. And now what our default heuristic is for every 250 users to spin up a new agent. So what's 2,000 divided by 250?
I'm going to get 8 users, 8 machines.
I'm going to get 8 machines that were created for me and provisioned that I didn't have to do anything just by hitting apply and close. So let's go ahead and run this, and you'll actually see that even though Lewis was initiated from Visual Studio and the agents were running on the cloud, that I'm actually going to be able to look at it from my local load test manager and look at those reports side by side.
I got to stop because I got to come back and revisit what you just did. So in the last couple minutes, you explored the website, you created the steps to walk through the website that you wanted to load up. You specified, I want to come in from these types of browsers in the header, and then you spun up 8 machines and are loading it with 2,000 users in a stepped load function.
That is correct. And I did that in, I don't know, looks like 8 minutes according to your prompts.
Excellent. That is something, that is brilliant.
So you had a series of questions, I believe, Steve.
Yeah, I did. So you mentioned that I could, if I was running locally, you kind of threw that out there as a side thing. If I'm running locally, I can just listen to performance counters, but there's maybe a better way to do this if I'm running in the cloud or if I'm running these load tests. How do I deal with those?
And I didn't show you that. Thanks, Steve. So sure. How did I actually make sure and grab the data from my application insights? This is what we're seeing on the screen. How do I capture this data from my production system? So going back into Visual Studio and taking a look at that load test that we just created, here it is, there is an applications node that was added as soon as I made it a cloud test. As soon as I made this a cloud test, it added an applications folder. That wasn't there before. And if I right click and choose Get Performance Data, I'm going to go out and have available to me all of the components I've got registered in Application Insights. Now in this case, I want to go ahead and grab some of those performance counters. So what you pointed out, Steve, is since I didn't do this, is I'm going to have no performance data in the 2,000 test run that I just did. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these performance counters and rerun another run. Now, if I'm doing the math right, I had 8 machines before, and I just initiated again. It means I now have 16 computers working for me. And then, of course, the second run will give me my performance data. So if we go back to Visual Studio Online, you'll see that that big spike I was talking about is now here. I can see all those request rates coming in real time. And you'll see that if I go back to last 12 hours, the issue with hitting that database, where was that? Maybe I have to go further back than that. Maybe it was last night. Let's go last 3 days. I have resolved that problem. And again, I just use it using this very simple test. So this problem right here was me looking at that page. And again, I think it took me 1,500 users before I finally initiated that problem. And what it was, I think I was actually hitting an index lock with my SQL statement. And of course, going into my slowest queries and going directly to code showed me the line of code.
Okay, so for the listeners and the viewers of this, Chuck, Charles, how do I get started? What do I do right now to get started so that these folks and me can start using this cloud-based load test?
I believe you guys have already demonstrated how to create a Visual Studio Online account, right?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So from there, you're actually going to see, let's go ahead and go to this page. This is where you'll start. This is what
Yep.
you're going to see. And actually, what you're going to see the first time is a project creation, where it's going to walk you through a team project.
Yep.
Okay.
We've created a team project. Yep, we're ready to go with that.
So you're going to go back to your home page by clicking on this blue button, and that gives you a big tile here or a hub here. Both of those take you to the same place. I would recommend using the hub because this will never move. These tiles actually do change based on what's new. So going out and going into that load test hub menu is where you're left with supplying those two pieces of information and setting up your load test. Again, the problem with teams not creating load tests because it takes too long, I hope that we've solved this for you. And one thing I didn't point out, going back to this homepage one last time, is that by default, you actually get 15,000 V-user minutes. So we ran a test for 2,000 users for 3 minutes. So we used 6,000 of our 15,000. So we would have used,
A little less than half. Somewhere.
yeah, a little less than half. So your tests are free initially as well. And you don't have to run that big a test.
That's fantastic. So 15,000 free minutes just for signing up to Visual Studio Online. I click the hub, enter the URL I want to test, and push go.
That's right. And the reason mine says 2 million is this is a test account, and I happen to have access to the back end.
Charles, I want to thank you so much for coming and introducing us to Visual Studio Online cloud-based load tests. I think it's been a phenomenal tour, and there's no excuse any longer to not firing up Visual Studio Online, reaching out and load testing your application. Charles, thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this session, we're going to be going through Application Insights 101. I'm James Tupper.
And I'm Stephen Borg.
We're going to be covering what Application Insights is, as well as what it looks like in the new Azure portal. So, Steve, what is Application Insights?
So Application Insights is a new tool published by Microsoft that helps do application performance monitoring. It lets you know things like how many times has your website been accessed, what's the performance of your virtual machines in the cloud, things like their CPU usage and those sorts of things. There's a lot of details in there. And why I call it the new Application Insights is that it was originally launched with Visual Studio Online, and it's been a very tight component of Visual Studio Online. Really cool, powerful functionality built right into Visual Studio Online. In fact, you'd go to your Visual Studio Online account, and there was a link right there. Now, it's been a little bit pulled out. We have this new portal in Azure coming, portal.azure.com. It's pretty much here. You can do most of your administration. And that Application Insights stuff in Visual Studio Online has been pulled away into Azure. It is such an incredible feature that it's been moved from just Visual Studio Online, which is a part of Azure, to its own part of Azure. It's that fundamental. So what we're going to be doing today is showing Application Insights on the new portal, and then probably how to configure it today as well.
Yeah.
So Application Insights gives you an insight into the way your application is running, what websites are being hit, etc. That kind of a neat thing. Let's dive into a demonstration and start by walking through the portal. So let's talk about how to use Application Insights. I'm at the portal.azure.com here, and if you look, I've just basically can see the web health here, and we're going to dive into Azure more deeply in another session. But in this session, we're taking a look at Application Insights specifically. So I want to browse, and I'm going to browse to Application Insights. So let's scroll down, grab Application Insights. Again, it's a key fundamental part of the Azure experience today. So if I open it up, I have a lot of different Application Insights things that were created for me. I can tie these to all of these ASP.NET websites, but for our purposes, we've wanted to take application insights and group some things together with them. So here is the application insights that I've created and lit up. So if I drill into that application insights, I can see some things like server requests, etc., for this VC Dev application insights. You'll notice down here there are no requests for this time period. That can be a little confusing. If you click it, it pops up and says, here's kind of a timeline. There's no data available. Let's make sure we set the time range appropriately. So I'm going to click the time range and say, potentially for the last 3 days. So now we can see that we've had server requests, we've had some bumps in here. And as we scroll down, we can look at things like our server response times. We had some really slow response times, and we've dropped down, and we've gotten a lot faster as we've done some of these additional tests. Our server requests, we can look at these and see the total number of requests. We've had 13,000 requests, 648 particular ones. We've had the website response times, had some pretty bad response times, all the way down to much faster response times, kind of depending, a 500 millisecond range to return. Also, I've set up some tests against this to constantly reach out and ping the websites to make sure it's up. I've had 24 successful tests. During that period of time, 0 of those have failed. Other things I can see. What are my slowest response times? This particular one, login callback, is one of the worst. So when we are first logging in, we're making that call and kind of negotiating, and that seems to take a long time. Some reports, this particular Acme report, this control chart, seems to take a long time to render, as does some of the other reports. I can see failed requests here. I can look at the sessions per browser, and in all of these, you can do things like drill in. I can click it in, see a little bit more. I like 1.7 thousand Internet Explorer pings against that. At Chrome, we see Chrome 37. We've had 2 unique browser sessions, one Safari session. I think the Safari session was probably yours.
Yeah.
off your phone. The Internet Explorer ones and the unknown ones, those were created by a load test that I ran and kind of pushed against it. So you can see some of the things that have happened. We can drop into the top page views, view things here, the number of sessions as we go, etc. There's a lot of fairly informative stuff. Now, Application Insights provides insight not just into the web pages and the responsiveness, but we can also go and view like the servers themselves. So uptime, downtime, and whenever you create a new something, a new virtual machine, a new website in Azure, it automatically tags a couple of those for you to track those and sends it into the Application Insights. And that's kind of a walkthrough. It gives you this ability to understand what's happening inside of your particular website. Now, I have to go back, and I do need to talk about where this is going. We have seen the future, and the future is our past. When Visual Studio Online was hosting the Applications Insight portal, there was a lot more functionality that was available to you, and you can still see it. It's not gone. It's just in the old portal. So if you go to portal.microsoftazure.com, you're going to see a fuller view of your data, a little bit more details. I can see a little button whenever I've deployed a new app into that website, for instance, whenever there's a new build that was deployed. And there's a lot of other details that are really very, very powerful. So if you want to get a view of what's coming, simply go into what we had. If you go to your Visual Studio account and click on the Application Insights button there, you'll see a different variety of things. And some of those, I have to say, are very powerful. If you get a failure, for instance, in your website, you can simply click on it and drill all the way down into the code that launched that website and that had the problems there. And that's in production. So highly recommend Application Insights. What you've seen here is just the glimmerings as it's moving to the new portal. Very rapidly, you're going to see a lot more really cool functionality.
That's a lot of really cool stuff. You get to see page response times. You get to go all the way down into the server and actually see some of the calls that are actually happening to the application itself, right? It looks pretty complicated though. Like how do you actually set that up, right? Is it easy? What if I was a user brand new and I wanted to start using Application Insights? What would I do? How do I get there?
That is a fantastic question. Let's show you. I'm going to close out this portal completely, and we're going to open up Visual Studio and walk through a potential example. Now, there's two areas. We need to set up Application Insights to get a particular key that we use, and we need to do something in Visual Studio. So let's start in Visual Studio with simply a File, New Project. And for a new project, I'm going to choose a web application, and I'm going to call it my test web app, for lack of a better thing. And on the very right-hand side of your project, right now, out of the box, do you want to add Application Insights to the project? And there's a button, a click. You simply select it and say, what subscription do you want to use? I want to use my Steve MSDN subscription for Application Insights. Where do we send telemetry to? I want a new Application Insights resource, and I'm going to default it to my project name. I have one called My Web I could use. Let's create a new one, and we can configure those settings if we wanted to change the project name or something like that to use something else. We could just type something else in there. I'm not going to add this one to source code control for now. You very much should. It just takes a little bit longer in the demo. And we click OK. And my test web app, then we can say it's an MVC app. I'm not going to host it in Azure. I probably should be hosting it in Azure. But once again, we just need to trim this down for the demo. And MVC is here. We're off and running. And we click OK. And it spins up the My Test web app project. And frankly, it's doing all the hard work for me. It reaches out, it does all the configuration, it's setting it up. Look, you can see right here, it's adding Application Insights to the project. It's just getting a couple NuGet packages. So if you have a project that already exists, you can really right-click, and there's a shortcut on your project that says Add Application Insights if it's a web project. Or you could go in and do it yourself manually by setting up some NuGet properties. What this brings me to, once it's updated, is I have an application insights.config file. You can see here's the configuration. And down here is the key for this resource. So this resource, My Test Web App, you need to have the right key for your Azure portal. So in other words, when I go to portal.azure.com and I'm looking under Application Insights, this key is provided under the My Test Web App. So the only reason I'm pointing that out is if you wanted to do it separately, you could. This does everything for you, so you don't get no confusion. And off I go. I now publish, and I am off and running. Let's go back to Azure, and I'm logged in here, and let's browse through and take a look at Application Insights. And here is My Test Web App, and my application it's now configured to start gathering that data. Now, a couple different things. We're not out of the woods yet. We still need to run our application. We need to deploy it, but there's some code we need to run. So we've added Application Insights. We need to add some code to monitor our web pages. So on each web page, if you're doing websites and you want to say which are the most popular ones, here is the code. And it auto-populates everything for you. Take a look. There's my instrumentation key, everything I need, and you just copy that thing up and back to your Visual Studio and pull up one of your views. We may have the view start, and every page you want to track, like our layout. This might be the one that we're using to render everything, our core one, or if everything we wanted to render here. And right under the head tag, we would add that. And actually, very interesting, it's already added it for me. I thought I had one more step. That would be the step you take if you needed to light it up yourself. Oh my goodness, it is in here already, and there it is. Already instrumented my entire app. So, If you were to do it yourself, you go in and create an application insights, cut and paste that, paste it here, make sure you have application insights applied. But if you want to start from scratch, man, it's easy. File, new project, website, click the Add Application Insights button, and you are in. So basically, there is no excuse not to have application insights just lit up. Very small performance hit against your server. It's just a little piece of JavaScript that needs to run, and you can start to monitor a lot of what's going on. And I should say, we've talked a lot about deploying to Azure here, and the ones we have are deployed in Azure. It doesn't have to be deployed to Azure. You could be deployed to your own data center, on premises. It doesn't really matter as long as you have this little chunk, this script right here that's executing when people browse to that page. So, no excuses. In this demo, we've really gone through just what is Application Insights. We've bandied around a little bit about going back to the old Application Insights to see what's coming. And we've shown you how to configure Application Insights on your environment. So head out there, set it up, and we'll see you gathering some data very shortly.
Welcome to Visual Studio Online Fundamentals. In this session, we're going to be talking about Visual Studio Online and Azure. I'm James Tupper.
And I'm Stephen Borg.
So let's talk about this session overview. We're going to be talking about your MSDN subscription and the Azure benefits that you get with that subscription, which are pretty phenomenal, to be honest with you. And I think most people don't really know about them, which is surprising. Then we're going to jump into demos and do a lap around the Azure portal, as well as linking Azure to Visual Studio Online. So the first things first is if you have an MSDN subscription, what you want to do is activate your Azure benefits, right? Depending on which subscription you have, you get $50 to $150 in credits, and that's on a monthly basis, right? So that means every single month I have either $50, ranging from $50 up to $150 to just spend in Azure, and that means virtual machines, websites, virtual networks, VPN connections, whatever you want to use. You can just go ahead and spend it in Azure. Now, you can use Azure for anything. There's websites, cloud services, mobile services, SQL storage, Azure storage, content delivery network, HD Insight, media surface, and so much more. And the great thing about Azure is that they're adding more and more stuff every single day. I think it's at least once a week when I go and jump into the Azure portal, I see something new. Something that's in preview or something that was in preview is now completely full RTM, ready to go and use publicly, right? Now, another really cool thing is that if you link your MSDN subscription to Azure and you want to go over your spending limit, you get discounted prices, which is really nice, right? So if you're a subscriber and you want to spend over the $150 or the $100 or the $50, depending on what you have, you can do it really easily, and you get it at a lot cheaper than if you just were to use Azure without an MSDN subscription, right?
Now, I think it's probably very worth saying here, in almost all the other sessions, we're talking about VSO and you, and we haven't had any discussion of needing an MSDN subscription. Now, you don't need an MSDN subscription to use Azure. It's just if you have one, that link sure is nice, and you get that free money. So in this particular demonstration, the stuff we'll be talking about will apply whether or not you have MSDN, but if you do have MSDN, that's where you get those extra benefits.
Yeah. I actually run my blog on Azure for free because of using my MSDN benefits.
I think it's fantastic. It's a great use for them.
Yeah. So let's go into our first demo, which is going to be a lap around the Azure portal. Steve, you want to show us that?
Love to. So in this demonstration, we're going to be going down to or over to portal.azure.com. Now this is the new portal. It's always difficult. We're in the middle of a transition now. We're going to stick with what's in the new portal. That's portal.azure.com. If you pop over to portal.azure.com, you see what I get when I log in. Now I've logged in here, and you can see I've got myself up here, my little picture, etc. And Microsoft Azure, I can see the service health of all the organizations around here. I can see what's new, I can leave feedback, I can take the Welcome to Azure tour, which I actually really recommend, or going through the Quick Start as well. I can go to the Azure Gallery and buy new things that'll integrate with Azure. But I want to walk you through instead using some of the things. So there's notifications you may have, browsing, journeys, billing. I'm going to skip over most of these, but billing gives you like how much you've been charged, etc. I'm going to start with browse. Now browse lets me walk through various things on Azure. Now I'm going to click on everything up here. That's going to give me this nice little piece over here. And if I look at it, you can see application insights, document DB, MySQL databases, the Quick Start. Let's walk through a few and pull out a couple of these. We could go and do an awful long presentation on this, but the MVA has many really wonderful really training around all of these areas. It's an amazing resource. So application insights, that helps us identify some really cool things that might be happening with our website and profiling and things like that. Document DB is a document-based storage like a database, but it's a document database as opposed to a SQL database.
Like MongoDB.
Like MongoDB, similar to MongoDB. There's MySQL databases, which are an open source database tool. There's the Quick Start, which we talked about. There's Redis caches. That's another open source thing that Microsoft has brought in. That's a caching infrastructure. Resource groups are a way to define a bunch of different things, maybe an application insights and a MySQL and a SQL database, and put them all into one billing container, if you would, that resource group. Search services, we've got search services and indexing for us. We can look at the service health, SQL databases, SQL servers, just tons of things. Virtual machines, one of the most important. This is an infrastructure as a service, and I can spin up virtual machines in Azure. This is especially important to me as a developer if I'm using this dev-test type relationship. I might want to just spin up machines in Azure, throw them out there, deploy my code onto them, and not have to call up IT and wait 2 weeks for a virtual machine to be built for me. I can set up virtual networks. As an enterprise, you might want to set one of these up and tie it into your Active Directory and have it share in your Active Directory. There's hosting plans, websites, lots of other details. Wanted to pull that up and kind of do a quick, crazy walkthrough of some of the functionality. Now, I have to say, I am dead sold on Azure. Azure is a wonderful environment. We use it, James and I. James primarily is one of the key coders on an application we're building that's all in Azure. And the whole thing is hosted in different components of Azure. And what we've found is we're able to get that cycle time faster. We're able to build something, deploy it, test it, check it out, get very fast feedback because we're in Azure. I think it's a great tool. And it complements Visual Studio Online so very, very nicely. Because with VSO, I've got that single source of truth, I've got automated builds, and frankly, my automated builds can deploy straight into Azure. So I can do some really interesting things with Azure. Now that we've seen this, I might pull open and take a look at some things like websites. I can see any websites I have listed. And now this is my personal account, so I don't have all of the ones that we're building. Here, I guess that's ALM Crank. That's your website, actually. Let me go in and make sure I'm located in my directory. I'm going to pop over to this one. This one's more mine.
Yeah.
ALM Crank was yours, but we'll come back in again. Just needed to get my permission once again to make sure I'm authenticated into that account. So here I am back again, and we can browse through again and see some of the websites. We can load up. These are mine, and I frankly have just one that I was using as a kind of an experiment with Nancy and some others. More importantly, our team projects. And this is where we want to start talking about how team projects potentially work with Visual Studio. So I can pop that open and I can create team projects right from here. Now, I'm probably going a little bit further. I'm probably jumping in further than I should have, because I suppose there's more things we should talk about now that we've had this end-to-end walkthrough.
So how do you get these benefits? I have an MSDN subscription, but how do I actually activate the Azure benefits to take advantage of that $50 or the $150 that my MSDN subscription gives me?
That is really where I think we need to demo. So for the listener, how do you go out, activate your subscription, and then go into the Azure portal and make that linkage? Get that Azure tied to your Visual Studio Online subscription. Now you don't have to, once again, tie VSO to Azure, but I think it's a great thing to do. So let's link those two up. And I'm going to do that by going to msdn.microsoft.com, signing in. You'll see I'm signed in right here, Stephen Borg, ALM MVP, and I'm in this basic front page. Now to get there, I'm going to my MSDN subscription, and it's very simple. Once you've signed in, you'll notice I have a Visual Studio Ultimate with MSDN, and right from here, I can do a couple of things. Now we've come from the perspective in all our other demos of not being an MSDN subscriber, just going and signing up. But if you are, here you can create a Visual Studio Online account right here. You can link to like organizational accounts, things like that. Most importantly for us is activate Microsoft Azure. And we can click on that link to activate our Azure subscriptions. Now, I'm in. Right, it's signing me up. It's got the sign up window, bringing me into some of the Azure portal here. I've signed up. My account's been activated, and why? Because this is what I use day in, day out. So it says not available. I already have used up my Azure subscription benefit. Now remember, I'm using the wrong term. Used up is the wrong term. Every month I get $150 to use on Azure, which frankly is a lot of time.
It really is.
Yep. So that's how you sign up for your Azure benefits. Again, mine says it's not available, but that's simply because I've already used it.
Yeah. You've not used it, you've already activated it.
I've already activated it. Yeah, that's true. That's very, very true.
Yep.
So next demo is then saying, how can I take those benefits, that Visual Studio Online and the Azure benefits, and link them together? Now, we're in a transition period as we go to portal.azure.com. So in this next demo, I'm going to be going back to Visual Studio, and I'm at into Internet Explorer rather, and I'm at portal.azure.com. And this time, rather than going and browsing to it, I'm going to say create a new everything and select Team Project right there. Now this brings me to a whole different UI. So there's some different UI experiences, and right now there's some different ways to get it back, but here it tells me a lot about it, gives me some things that I get, etc., and I can click Create to create a new team project. Now when I create a new team project, I give it a name just like anything else. I configure my version control here, but most importantly is this account setting where it says configure required settings. If you're brand new, you need to configure these required settings. Now I'm going to click it and bring up some interesting details. I am at use existing account. I want to use like the NWC account that we've been using. It's currently not highlighted. That feature has not yet been lit up in the new portal. So if I want to do that, I need to go back and go to portal.windowsazure.com and go kind of the other direction in. That's a little bit unfortunate for right now, but we want to stay in the new portal because this is where your experience is going to be. So we can go instead and create a new one. This gives me the walkthrough, the URL, much like before, and I can choose my URL. This might be my personal demo for Steve. Make it nice and long so that it's not already used. I get the little smiley face there, and I can click OK. And at this point, I can start walking through that setup. I can give my name for my new team project, which is my Azure TP, team project. I can add it to my start board. It's based on this subscription, and create. At this point, my team projects are embedded into the new Azure portal. So now I have a different experience. I can come at it through the demo site for steve.visualstudio.com, or I can come through the portal and it's fully integrated into my portal experience. So in this demonstration, James, what we've really done is we've come together and we've created a team project, we've activated our benefits, and we've linked those things up. And that's what you can do on your site is you can go out to the new portal and create a new Visual Studio account, Visual Studio Online account, or you can go to the old portal and you can link up maybe the account that you just created earlier. Either way, it's pretty straightforward and easy to do, and I recommend you get started on it right away. But if nothing else, activate those MSDN benefits. It's an unbelievably good deal.